everybody.
Yeah. That's what's on the schedule.
That's on the law.
Congratulations for trying to come in.
Okay. Are we ready?
We're
ready. Okay, I will call the meeting to order. Pursuant to Section 84-1411 of the Nebraska statutes, notice of this meeting was given on April 4, 2018. Pursuant to Section 84-1411 of the Nebraska statutes, the next regular meeting of the Board of Trustees is scheduled for Wednesday, June 6, 2018 at 9 a.m. in the Board Conference Room at the Teacher Administrative Center, 3215 Cumming Street, Omaha, Nebraska. However, there will be discussion later in this meeting to change the date of the June meeting. The agenda will be kept current and available for public inspection in the retirement office at the Teacher Administrative Center during regular working hours. Pursuant to Section 84-1412 of the Nebraska statutes, the public is hereby informed that a current copy of the Nebraska Open Meetings Act is posted in the Board of Education meeting room on the north wall. You may call the roll.
Ripa?
Here.
Ray?
Here.
Purdy? Absent, excused. Jones?
Here.
Pavlovic?
Here.
Evans?
Here.
Erickson?
Here.
6 present.
Okay, we do have a quorum. The first item on the agenda is public comment, as this is one of our public comment months. Is there anyone here wishing to address the board this morning? Okay, seeing none, I will call on a motion to go into closed session.
I move the Board of Trustees go into closed session for the protection of the public interest and for the prevention of data injury to the reputation of individuals. Discuss with legal counsel, the executive director, and James Ellis, legal matters affecting the trust fund and other financial matters affecting retirees.
Okay, it's been moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, it has been moved and seconded. Is there discussion? If not, you can call the roll.
Evans?
Aye.
Pavlovic?
Aye.
Jones?
Aye.
Purdy? Ray?
Aye.
Ripa?
Aye.
Erickson?
Aye.
6 ayes.
Okay, motion carries. Let me remind the board that the purpose for closed session is for the protection of the public interest and for the prevention of needless injury to the reputation of individuals, to discuss with legal counsel, the executive director, and James Ellis legal matters affecting the trust fund and other financial matters affecting retirees.
All right.
Okay, we are in closed session. Okay, we are back in session. Would you call the roll, please?
Erickson?
Here.
Evans?
Here.
Pavlovic?
Here.
Jones?
Here.
Ray?
Here.
Ripa?
Here.
6 present.
Okay, we have a quorum. I would call on Delane for a motion.
I move that we approve pension payroll for May 3rd, 2018 in the amount of $9,917,429.22 to 4,680 payees. Approve 4 new retirements effective May 1, 2018. Ratify terminations of retirement benefits effective May 2018 due to death of annuitant. Approve May 2018 refunds to 29 former OPS employees taking distributions of employee contributions plus interest in the aggregate of $392,624.61. And finally, approve accounts payable for the month of May in the amount of $8,931.
Okay, it's been moved. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Discussion? All right, seeing none, call the roll.
Ripa?
Aye.
Jones?
Aye.
Ray?
Aye.
Pavlovic?
Aye.
Evans?
Aye.
Erickson?
Aye.
6 ayes.
Okay, motion carries. Next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from last month's meeting, which you should have in front of you. I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Make a motion to accept minutes.
It's been moved to second.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any corrections?
Did.
I have one on page 5 of 8. Erikson is misspelled in the last paragraph.
No, it's not.
I had one, did we get in the notation? I know Principal Beth Holland had asked for the board to consider having evening meetings so that we could have public comment. Did that get in here, or did I just not see it?
It's on page 8, third paragraph.
Yeah, I recalled that, yeah.
Click on the back page. You got to go one more page.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay. Third paragraph.
I didn't know if we were going to respond to that this meeting or not, since it was in the note from last that we had that request. But hopefully we can during executive report. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments? Corrections? All right, if not, you can call the roll.
Evans,
Aye.
Havlicek,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
Purdy, Ray,
All right.
Reba,
Aye.
Erickson,
Aye.
6 ayes.
All right, motion carries. Next up is Pat Beckham is here with us this morning to do our annual valuation report. Pat, welcome and thank you for coming.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Yes, so I'm here to share with you January 1, 2018 valuation results. We're considering them draft just because we're waiting until we have a chance to present and have discussion here, and then if there's no changes, obviously, we very quickly have the final report. So we're going to walk through the presentation. As always, stop me anytime you have questions or want to discuss something, and we'll address it right then. So just a reminder, the purpose of the actuarial evaluation, we're measuring assets and liabilities. So the system has made promises to pay benefits in the future. We don't know exactly what the amount of those are, when they'll start, how long they'll be paid, but those are indeed the liabilities of the system. There have been contributions made in the past and investment earnings accumulated to help pay for those benefits. So we're measuring those two, evaluating kind of the funded status of the plan, and then using that information along with funding policy to evaluate the statutory fixed contributions that we'll talk about in a minute, and then determine if there's any additional contribution required for the current year by the school district. The valuation also allows us to take a look back for the last 12 months and determine whether the actual experience has been better or worse than anticipated by the assumptions. Remember last year we did a lot of work, had the experience study, evaluated all the assumptions, made some changes that were fairly significant. We know there's variations from year to year because those assumptions are long-term, and we're not going to hit them each and every year, but we do this as a way to monitor it and also help us evaluate what impacted the unfunded actuarial liability. So when we see how do we go from where we were last year, the unfunded liability, to this year, this is what helps us quantify gains and losses from assets and liabilities. And last but not least, looking to see if there are trends, trying to take a glimpse forward. It's easier in the years we do projection models than it is, but we do look to see what might be coming down the road as a way to give you a heads up. So the funding of OSERS, members contribute 9.78% of their pay towards the retirement system. The state of Nebraska contributes 2% of payroll. The school district, by law, contributes the greater of 101% of the members' contributions, about 9.88% of payroll, or the amount that's deemed to be necessary to maintain the solvency of the system. And that's determined by the board upon recommendation of the actuary and the board of trustees. You also develop the funding policy. And so that's what drives, when I talk about the actuarial contribution rate, the funding policy is driving that calculation.
The legislative bill that passed this session, doesn't that determine?
I think that did change the language.
I think it's changed.
You're right.
I think
Yeah,
we
I
have.
think-
We'll get to that a little bit later, but the language did change that solvency is now defined at
LD
1005.
1005.
That solvency is now defined by what the actuary has annotated in the valuation report.
The Board of Ed is sort of out of the loop.
Yeah.
That was the
That's
change,
how I
right?
understand LD
Yeah.
1005.
Right. So the actuary
trustees and the board's
annotates.
out of it. It's statutory.
I think that was in there. That was in there the year before
Yeah.
too. It was just clarified in this latest because there was some discrepancy. It was a little bit of a gray area, but it was in the bill the previous year, but it was clarified in 1005, as I understand it.
Okay. So basically, the Board of Trustees funding policy for 101% of the member rate is what drives the district's contribution. That change. All right, so remember, we do an actuarial evaluation now every January 1st, for years and years and years, it was September 1st. So we shifted in 2017 to a January 1 snapshot, and we use that term because this system is alive and changing all the time because you've got members earning service and with salary and people leaving, and not to mention assets change every single day. But we just stop it every year on January 1 and we measure, again, the assets and the liabilities. It's like you go in for a physical checkup, an annual checkup. This is the plan's sort of financial checkup. I mentioned earlier that the liabilities are the value of the future benefits, and the challenge being that we don't know a lot about those future benefits, and we use assumptions to help us estimate those. There is a reasonable range for every assumption that we use. I'd like to say, like, I have some special magic or a crystal ball that tells me which one's the right one, but the truth of the matter is nobody knows what the right answer is because we're setting these assumptions again for the next 30 years. But recognize anytime we talk about assumptions, whether it's rate of return, termination, retirement, there are other assumptions that could be deemed to be reasonable. And if we sort of took the ranges, the low and the high, and ran numbers, we could get a pretty wide range of numbers that would still be reasonable. So it is not an exact, it's called actuarial science, but there's not science in that part of it. It's very much art, and it's very much kind of fluid and changes. That's why we do experience studies every 5 years. That's why we do evaluations every 4 years now. Thank you. See, I'm so old that I am still back in the last 25 years. So we're managing this very, very long-term obligation in the short term by trying to do the right things in the short term. That's where the evaluation experience studies assist us in that process. Again, we know there's going to be variations from year to year because when you set a long-term assumption, it's not going to play out that way each and every year. Take it out of context, and if you start saving for your child's college when they're born or age 1, you'll make an assumption about what the trust fund is going to earn. It's not going to earn that every year. When he goes to college, you might have been right, but you're going to get that variation. We're in the same situation here, only we have lots of different assumptions that impact us. All right, so kind of high level, there was a 10% return on the market value of assets. But you might recall that when we did the 1/1/17 valuation, we had a significant difference between the actuarial value and the market value. Okay, so the actuarial value is the smooth value that we use to try to produce some stability in the results. And the actuarial value was higher by $189 million. So when we come through this year, and we have 10%, which is higher than our assumed rate of return, we get kind of the headwind of the deferred losses means that our return on actuarial or smooth value is just over 4, which is less than 7.5. So that spun off what we call an actuarial loss. Not an investment loss, an actuarial loss. Not as favorable as what the assumption was.
Because we're still digesting the losses from the investment returns in the past.
Correct. Exactly. We're working our way through it. Now, the 10% helped a little bit.
Right.
All get out. painful. I get it. I get it.
Yeah, and if we hadn't had
The
at
10,
least 10, it would have been
It would have been
Right.
worse. So
Yeah.
thank heavens we've got the investments finally turned some.
Right. Then on the liability side, we actually had an actuarial loss on liabilities. That means they were higher, the actual liabilities were higher than what we would have expected based on the assumptions. And we had two sources. One was retirement experience, and the other was salary increases. And the salary increases are actually kind of who received the salaries. It's not like across the
Right.
board the district granted, way higher increases. But I believe, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when we did the experience study, we noted there were some changes in what I would call longevity pay. People with longer service got some increases. Well, those folks, long service, have a lot of liability. So if they get a higher increase than what we sort of had thought they were going to get in the valuation, it can easily create 12 million is not a huge number when you look at the value of the liabilities. So, the fund years are gain on assets, gain on liabilities. So we're feeling the pain because we've got a lot actuarial loss on investments, assets, and liabilities. So
The salary increases and given to these folks was higher than what we were projecting them to be.
correct. And at the end of your career, the assumption is pretty much kind of just the general wage increase.
Because we knew what the certified staff and those increases were going to be, right? We knew what those were. Did we not?
No, we never. I mean, remember the valuation, we gather it Jan 1, and everything going forward, we know what they're earning that year. Well, actually, in that case, the prior 12 months. So now we always worked in school years, and now we're crossing over where we've got part of 2 school years. But we knew when we gathered the data, 1/1/17, we knew what they earned actually in 2016. We took that information and the salary increase assumption, and we project forward.
Okay, but that salary increase assumption,
was 4%.
we knew what that was.
375.
375.
Yeah, and that's what they were going to get. And that we knew that because that was
Yeah,
part of the
right.
contract, right?
That didn't create,
No.
that's just the assumption.
That on average, over the course of a career, they are going up approximately 3.75 per year.
Plus merit. I mean,
Plus, right.
remember, shorter service, they
You're
get higher
looking.
increase.
This is still looking at the long term.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
However, in this particular case, that year, some seasoned employees who are closer to retirement got a bigger bump than 3.75, and they're going to be able to go out the door in the next couple of years. That's what skewed everything.
And so it's kind of a one-time hit. If they got that, what I would call longevity pay, and it was a bump. It's usually kind of a one-time. I mean, they may get more increases, but not percentage-wise. Everything here is working percentages. Like Cecilia said, we expected it to go up 375. So if it even went up 4, we take a hit because the salary's higher. What are benefits based on?
I got you.
Salary.
Yeah. Okay.
So
I'm surprised it went up that much. I mean,
We created a salary schedule
Yeah.
for the certificated staff, so they
but
were
we've got
moving in
half of them,
lanes.
more than half are classified, and they don't have that. So
No, they didn't have that.
So
I
where's
don't-
your liability?
Your certificate. That's where the heavy liability is.
Well, that went back to our 3-year contract where our first 5-year teachers got a higher increase to bump up our base, right? And then
Created
I think in that
lanes.
3rd year,
Yeah.
season 1's got that increase. So we hit the 3rd year of that.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
So that's a $12 million increase on top of the $44 million loss that we're going to add to our unfunded liability, which will increase our art payment and number of employees I got let go. I do the quick math on that.
I mean, any kind of a loss increases the unfunded liability. So the funded ratio, which is actuarial or smooth value of assets divided by actuarial liabilities, went down slightly, 65% in 2017 valuation, 64 in this valuation, and the correlating factor factor there is the increase in the actuarial contribution rate Dr. Evans referred to.
Let me ask you a question. I know this is projection. Maybe you can't give it to us, Pat. Let's say we get another 9 or 10% increase in market values. If that happened, and we didn't have the $12 million in the loss of liabilities that caused the other $12 million loss, would we not increase the unfunded? I guess I'm trying to figure out how many years are we going to be digesting these losses from poor investments? How long is that going to impact us?
And I think we'll actually talk about that in a couple of slides.
Okay.
But if I could just point out one thing on this slide, that second sub-bullet of the first bullet, where it's talking about the deferred investment loss. So we did digest part of the loss from the $189 million. That difference is still $131 million. So that's 11% difference between market and actuarial. So this isn't precise, but you could say if you were going to hopefully eliminate it, you'd have to have 11% plus the 7.5.
Okay.
So 18.5 to eliminate the deferred losses and not have a loss on assets that increases that liability.
Gotcha.
That's sort of the back door. Okay. This valuation, we had no changes to the assumptions for the methods. Next, I had two bills. We talked about 1005 earlier, some of the changes that made. The one that from a...
Last year.
Yeah, last year. What was the one that passed with the factors, Cecilia?
That's 1005.
Okay, that was 1005. Okay.
Everything got moved to 1005.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. All right. But we did have a bill passed last year that created the new benefit structure for members that are hired after July 1 of 18.
On or after?
Cecilia's going to hold my feet to the fire on this. This tier thing, I got to get straight.
Just out of curiosity, when it says on or after, if someone signs a contract in May, is that going to be, they're going to be before?
No. Their hire date is July 1, regardless of when contracts were signed. Their hire date, it will be July 1. So that will be on July 1.
Kind of the other thing, Cecilia, that we talked about, that's the date they become a member.
For this particular, hold on one second.
Is it the same thing that drives?
No, for this one, it is hired.
Hired, okay.
Hired, right.
All right, so the change here was, and you probably remember, for Rule of 85, you used to have to have a minimum age of 55 to qualify, and that moved to 60. Obviously, applies prospectively, so there was no one in this valuation that it impacts, so it didn't have any impact on these results. In the future, it creates kind of a lower cost for new people, because those who could have retired at 55, and we assume some portion of them
Would
currently do, we now pushed it down to 60. Now, it's not going to have a huge impact because not everybody's eligible for Rule of 85. Not everybody that's eligible retires at 55. But it will, over time, as we get more people and payroll moving into this tier, will kind of make the normal cost, the ongoing cost of the plan will tend to go down over time. That has a positive impact because that frees up dollars to pay out the unfunded from the fixed contribution rate, or alternatively, it makes the actuarial contribution rate lower than it would otherwise be.
Right.
So, Ms. Beckham, would you kind of repeat that? So, new employees coming in on or after July of 2018, as they funnel through their career, the normal cost for those employees will start to go down, and that will start to, they will become the majority.
Yes, exactly. We're going to have a changeover in the population, and when we, ran projections, that is modeled in those projections that over time, because right now we've got 3 tiers, this will be 4.
Yeah, this will be tier 4.
So, we've got movement of people leaving one tier, especially tier 1, sort of the highest cost tier. So as they leave tier 1, you replace them with a tier 4 person. The ongoing cost for that tier 4 person on average, is lower than the person who's leaving. But it takes time for all that to play out. And if there's any
And I know
sort of shrinkage in the number of bodies, that means you won't see that savings evidenced as quickly.
I know I'm putting you on the spot. Could you give us a ballpark of years when we should start seeing that shift?
Again, if the population, the number of actives stays about the same, we generally say 10 to 15 years. Is that turnover?
Starts funneling through.
Yeah. But I do have one client where the legislature made a change, I think probably been 5 or 6 years ago, but then they haven't really hired very many new people, so that, you know, the new tier can't really do its job when you don't really have very much paperwork. So it's a longer-term solution, but it does have a positive impact on funding. So I think we do need to recognize that. All right. So look at kind of membership, assets, liabilities, contribution rates in that order. This information's in the report. We talked earlier that we've got currently in this valuation 3 tiers, and the next valuation will be 4. This is where their tier is governed by when they became a member. So tier 1 is really everyone who was a member before July 1 of 2016. That's still where the majority of the bodies are in the table. Okay. These people are going to be higher in average pay because they've been working longer. But you can see that the count, is going down, over 200 lower. We'll continue to see that as people retire, terminate employment. That tier 1 will decline, and now they'll start coming in at tier 4. Same, you can see tier 2, which is essentially closed. Tier 3 is very new, which is why the number goes from 316 to 637. That tier was, that was.
So tier 2 is decreasing because it's a closed tier, so it'll just continue to decrease. Right.
I'm sorry, tier.
I said tier 2 is decreasing, and it should because it's a closed tier, so it'll always be decreasing.
Right. And I think the footnotes.
Oh, yeah.
Looking
That should have been
at
17, yeah.
Yeah, it should be 17. So we've got a really short window there for tier 3. And again, when tier 4 comes in, they're all closed. So over time, they're all going to go down, and all the new people come into tier 4. Sorry about that. Overall, if we look at total certificated, that number is up slightly, 1.3%. It actually helps the pension funding when there are more active members. They have to be budgeted for, but from a purely selfish pension funding standpoint, or it's better. And then you can see classified.
Just as a point of reference for you on that point, there's 2 things going to impact that number. One is enrollment growth, because then that funds the new position. It becomes a part of those numbers. We see that going up still, although if we don't pass the bond issue on May 15th, it won't go up much because we're out of space. And so we have no room. And so we have 6,000 kids in the learning community outside of OPS. So if that passes, that number will go up because we're going to have more space. Plus, we're going to capture some kids out in the Northwest that we currently lose. At 156 and 9, there'll be a new high school there. So long story short, for the group's purpose, if that passes May 15, we've got a good chance of that number going up, which is good for everybody, by the way, actually good because we need the space for kids. If it doesn't pass, it won't go up much because we're out of space, so we can't add staff. Plus, we're doing budget reductions to meet the ARC because of the poor investment returns. And so we're reducing staff. So far, right now, the board hasn't voted, but we're looking at 75 employees have lost positions, 94 positions to help meet the $18.5 million ARC. So it hurts that number, but by and large, if the bond passes, the growth will more than compensate for the loss to meet the ARC, if that makes sense.
It does, and I might just ask if I'm not in the hospital district. secret. I don't want to appear to be really uninformed. But so if the bond issue passes, what's the time frame before the new high schools are open and you're bringing in that enrollment? Like 4 years?
Yeah, about 4. Yeah, really to see them all come online. It's actually 2 new elementaries, some middle school, and 2 new high schools, as well as additions at other sites that have more portables than inside classrooms like Highland, Spring Lake, Clark. So it's new schools plus space. Part of that's to get rid of portables to 265. Currently, we have kids in portables 265. So the number will go up if it passes because we're going to keep some kids that we don't have space for today that opt out. It's hard to give you an exact number, but we grew by 900 kids this year, which helps us with adding to that number because we're going to add teachers if we have room. In some cases, we don't have the room, so we add parents because we can't add it in the classroom because there's no room. So it's really imperative that that passes in the 15th to help that number, but more so for kids. So I hope that helps.
It does. I was just curious, kind of short term, longer term, what this maybe look like.
The number should go up.
But more dramatically,
with the
4 to
bond.
5 years out, maybe,
Yeah.
opposed to next year.
Yeah, although you'll keep some kids. It'll impact you right away because we have parents right now that opt out after elementary school from the schools out west and middle schools, Davis and Buffett. There's a ton of kids that will stay if they think there's got to be a school done in 3 years. They'll even stay a little longer. So we'll keep some kids that are opting out in 5th grade, 6th grade in Delaney's neighborhood. They opt out sometimes. You know some of them.
Kid that's in 5th grade, so he's
And if there's a high school out there, you're going to definitely stay. Because
You got first year through there, so.
And then go on. So we'll keep some right away, even without the construction, that we typically would lose. So I'm anticipating over 1,000 new kids next year. We're 900 this year without the potential for these new spaces.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's also interesting.
I'm here to be a helper.
All right. So we covered actives, and that information is summarized at the top of this chart. Then we have some comparisons on, retirees, beneficiaries, people in pay status receiving benefits. And that's going up, but that's not unexpected. We definitely have the kind of baby boomers still working their way through the retirement status, and to the extent people can retire at younger ages, it tends to make that count grow. Cecilia asked me on the non-vested, so we've got inactive members. Some are vested, so they're entitled to receive a monthly benefit in the future once they meet retirement eligibility. That's over 1,043. And then we have some people who terminated employment, but their money is still in the system. So again, the valuation is going to capture every benefit payment that could possibly be made. That's an obligation, and so we include those account balances as a liability.
So there's 413 people who are in that category. Is what you're saying
Correct.
right now.
And their account balance, not their future benefit, but their account balance is factored into the valuation award.
But they could ask for it back tomorrow.
Correct. Just that's how we value it.
Yeah, I got you. Okay.
And we continue to pay interest on their account balances, which is a conversation for another time, but always keep that in mind as these are non-vested and we continue to pay interest.
What do you attribute to the increase? I mean, that's 19% from last year to this year. Get any hypothetical data as to
On just,
what type of employee that is, or is it just
well, okay, so you know how I started putting on our report, our refund report, the length of service. But for some reason, there's this group of people that, they get the letter and they wind up leaving the money here, until they need it. Now we have, the race in like, oh my gosh, I need this money now. This is not a bank. This is not a teller. You have to go through a process. But we are seeing people who leave the money here. Again, it is collecting a bit of interest, probably more than what a savings account.
1% or something.
So it's a conversation that we'll have for another time.
Well, that's an important point to consider with staff reductions. Because there may be more that you can do that or don't do that. So
Well, and they hope to get hired back, some of them, which is our goal.
Right.
We want to keep them hired as we're reducing positions. And so some may be off temporarily while we wait for an opportunity to rehire them.
You know, in another life, we instituted a policy, and again, this is not for any discussion now, but just to give you an idea, that if you were non-vested after 2 years, we stopped. After 24 months from your date of termination, interest was no longer applied.
And since we're looking at this now in January, which we weren't before, maybe there was a big jump from people who decided to retire in December, for example. And that
No,
could
that's
be remembered.
left. So they were separated from service. They separated themselves from service,
Okay.
or however they were separated.
And just kind of put it in perspective, so that the actuarial liability total is over $2 billion, and for this non-vested group, the liability is $2.3 billion.
So it's not a big
Not a big number, but feels probably worth having a discussion. Okay, Bob wants to cover the next slide.
Yeah, right.
All right. So
I get the top bullet.
the top
The second part, he
It's
gets
not
struggled.
really-
The next bullet.
All right. Yes. So we're all familiar with the volatility that exists in the market value, and when you again, we have a very long-term obligation. Benefit payments span out 100 years, even for current members. So we're trying to manage this long-term obligation in the short term, and extreme volatility just can lead us to sort of reaching, erroneous conclusions or decisions being made that would not be good for the long term. So one of the tools in the actuarial toolbox is called an asset smoothing method or asset valuation method. And it's simply kind of partial recognition of what's happening in the market, so that if there are swings up and down, they have time to kind of average out. Again, so you're not getting these wide swings. In this situation, where the school district actually is picking up the difference between the actuarial contribution rate and the fixed contribution rates that come in to finance the system, it's creating stability, and even though it doesn't feel like predictability, more than would be there otherwise.
Yes.
This would be horrendous if we were using pure market value.
Fair warning, yeah.
Yeah, you would not. Connie, your hair would be all green.
It is all right.
So it's very common. Most public plans do use some kind of a smoothing method, just because of the volatility that exists with the investments. The method that we're using is we calculate the expected asset value. Go back to last year's valuation, what the actual value was, and we say, what would the value be this year if we earned the assumed rate of return on the actuarial value, recognizing money that came in and money that was paid out in benefit payments? Okay, where would we be? That's our expected value. And then we say, well, what's reality is market value. So where's market? And we measure that difference, plus or minus, and we recognize 25% of it. So that's where the smoothing, it's market related. They all have to be market related by actuarial standards. And I'll make that point that we don't just come up with whatever we want. As credentialed actuaries, we have to follow our professional actuarial standards of practice that are set by the Actuarial Standards Board. And there's a specific one on asset valuation methods, like there are lots of other specifics that we follow. And that's one of the things. It has to be market related, and it cannot have a bias so that, we're always going to report. So it doesn't look at that. So we're following actuarial standards. The math on it means, sometimes it's easier for people to understand, it's essentially a weighted average. I mean, it's 75% of your expected value, 25% of the market value. Okay. So it is not the most common method that's used by public plans. And Cecilia and I had a conversation and decided that we wanted to be sure that the board sort of fully understands the method, just because we think it's important. So, for example, the state of Nebraska's retirement systems use a different method that's probably the most common, that just looks at the market value at the beginning of the period and says, okay, if the assumed rate of return is 7.5%, in terms of dollars, what would I expect the return to be this year? And what was the actual return? And that dollar amount of difference is recognized equally over 5 periods, 5 years.
Because we have so much loss, we do it this way.
Nope.
This method's been in place back in the boom years when times were good.
Is that what got us in trouble?
No.
No, it's investment returns.
This is a timing mechanism, okay? That's really all it is. It's just a way to give the market returns a chance to average out highs and lows, okay? And we're going to look at a couple of graphs to help you try to understand the differences. They have pros and cons. There are different actuarial cost methods that are used to allocate the cost of benefits to periods of time. There isn't a right or a wrong. They have different attributes. That mean they have sort of advantages and disadvantages. But again, just in the interest of full disclosure, transparency, and we talked about it in the experience study, but we didn't do a deep dive into it. So I wanted to make sure that it's clear. I'm going to pause for a minute. I'm going to pick on Bob because he's not on the board because I don't work for you. But I'm going to start with the easier one. So the 5-year smoothing, does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
The way the state does it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So whatever that difference is, yeah, it's $10 million. You recognize $2 million a year for 5 years.
5 years.
And at the end of 5 years, it's done. It's over with.
But
And you've recognized it all.
But I have a question. So if it's a 5-year smoothing, the way the state does it, and this year you'd recognize $2 million.
Mm-hmm.
The next year when you do the valuation and it changes, then let's say the 10 goes to 8 or 7.5. You see what I'm saying? You started the first 5-year gap is at 10, 2 a year. When you do it again, let's say it's 7.5, so it's $1.5 million a year, not 2, right? You adjust that every
Yes.
year. It
Well,
is at a rolling,
you're creating a new piece.
a new piece.
A new
does it-
piece.
does
So
it-
the $2 million a year stays in place, but you layer it, so like
Right.
layered
So it
amortization.
might go up or might go
Might-
down.
So in the next year, it's the $2 million from the previous year plus whatever's attributable to that current.
So you'd go to 3.5.
Right.
Okay.
And then you have those two pieces, and the next year you have another piece.
Got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So doing it the way the state does it would cost more?
No. In the long run, it all gets recognized one way or another. There's no magic bullet here. It's just timing. At different points in time, they create different smooth values depending on what the market's doing, right? And how quickly you're recognizing it. What I will tell you is, because we've done some analysis with other clients that use what I would call the expected value approach, it has more smoothing in it. Okay. There's more smoothing. It takes longer to recognize the experience than 5 years. And when we did some work for Iowa a few years ago, it was more comparable in terms of how it recognizes the timing and the movement in the smoothing. It's probably more similar to like an 8-year kind of pattern. But there is, again, it's not, what is not going to make the cost higher or lower? What makes it higher or lower is what's happening on market value return. That's your driver.
Investments going up or are they going
Well,
down?
Yeah, sooner or later, it all
That's
works
it.
through the math.
That's it.
Well, what makes it higher or lower is the formula C plus I equals B plus E.
Right,
But the contributions have to be made too. That's the part.
right. I mean, we've talked about, what Cecilia's referring to is C plus I really equals B because E is so small.
Small, right?
So how do you pay for benefits? Contributions and investment income.
Right.
And investment income is lower contributions go
Have
up.
to go up, right.
And vice versa.
Impers is at 85% because their investment, they're not having to pay an ARC because their investments did a lot better than OSERS.
They have an audit.
The state's not paying an
Well,
ARC. They're not paying an additional.
Right.
We have
They're
a
not paying any
building
additional,
claims.
Cecilia.
No, they're right. They're not paying any additional.
No, they're not. We are. They are not because their investment returns, they're at 85% funded because their
I would-
investments came in higher.
I would point out the last time that there was an additional payment due, the benefit structure changed. So it's not all C plus I will be, if you change B long-term, affect C as well.
I understand that.
Okay.
I'm just saying they're not paying in additional on
Not
top
now.
of 101.
Right. Okay, so now let's wrestle with the other one, which is harder to understand. Okay, because it doesn't just recognize the difference equally. Okay, and I'm going to switch to the next slide. I don't want anybody to get all weighed down about this. This is
So let's
not going
go.
to happen.
Let's go through it slowly.
Yeah.
Right.
This, we are not going to earn 7.5% for the next 6 years. That's the only thing that your actuary can tell you. Pretty certain that scenario will not turn out. But I wanted to help distinguish the difference here. And all this is looking is at, again, where we're at 1/118. If we did earn 7.5 each and every year. So the black line's market value. Okay. The orange line is the NPERS method, the 5-year
Smoothing.
smoothing. You see at the end of 5 years, the orange line's on top of the black line. Because it's going to recognize there are no future actuarial losses on investments because we're earning 7.5 every year. So we're just letting what's in the pipeline work through the additional 4 years. So the lines converge. The blue line is the method that we're using. And what we say is that converges to market value asymptotically for anybody who's math oriented here. It just gets closer and closer and closer to the black line. We project it out 30 years. It won't ever be equal to it, but it's going to get ever and ever and ever, ever, ever closer. Okay? Now, some people have an issue with that. I don't, because this is not going to happen. Something similar, I'm not predicting the future either, but when you factor in volatility in returns, and all this is assuming that in 2018, they have a return of 19%, which makes the black line equal to the blue line.
Did NPERS have a 19% return?
No,
What did they?
I don't know. We haven't finished their valuations for calendar year 17. And to be honest, I don't remember for fiscal year 17. Too much water under the bridge. But this is, again, these are hypothetical. This is what we call sensitivity analysis. What if, what if, what if? And I picked 19 only to force the blue line and the black line to be equal. Okay? So from 19 forward, the actuarial value and the market value were equal. Then we modeled the actual returns that you see on the next slide, slide 12, the historical returns, because we might as well use history as opposed to picking something ourselves. And this is why, you know, it isn't a big concern because we have all this volatility and up and down in returns, smoothing. I mean, times the blue line is above the orange, times it's below. It takes longer. If you forever had the same return, it would take longer for our OSERS method to converge, but that's not going to happen because look at the return. How often is the blue line right on top of the black line? 2 times in 16 years, and it's close. So again, there isn't a right or a wrong. It's just a mechanism. If you don't like that mechanism, and certainly the Board of Trustees' ability, right, to change it, Cecilia and I wanted to make sure that you understood it and the implications. So one thing I do like is that it does what I call bounce back. It converges to market more quickly because if you have a 19% return in 18, you can see the orange line, you still don't get there. Because whatever you get, your 19% is above the 7.5. That difference gets spread over 5 years. Whereas in our case, it gets kind of bounced back. And it also lets us say, what does it take in a return to make sure we don't have an actuarial loss on assets? And that's a lot harder to do with the state's method, and it ends up being a huge number because you don't get to recognize credit for it. So, we can have more discussion now, we can have more discussion later, you can sit tight on it, but we just wanted to make sure that it was in front of you and that you understood.
So, Delane, you've now become an expert, right?
On the spot, huh?
The weighted average, the easiest example that I've come up with to try to help people understand it is if you were moving from this wall to that wall, and I told you to move a fourth of the way. Okay, so you move. But I told you to move a fourth of the way and a fourth of the way. Wouldn't be there in 4 times, right? Because you're only moving part of the way remaining. Okay? So I'm going to pretend I'm going to move, and I'm not very good at approximating. If I move a fourth of the way there, I'm here. So there's 3/4 left. And a fourth of 3/4 is 3/16, which is not a fourth. So, I move again. And then I'm moving a fourth
Of what's remaining.
of what's left. And then I'm moving a fourth of what's left.
Which is just here.
And you see what I mean? I don't get there.
You'll never get there, quite.
Right, I never will, because and I'm not skinny enough to do that, but when I'm here and I'm moving a fourth, I'm just, That's the only way visually to kind of help you understand the prior graph here, which is, it's ever moving closer. Okay? But remember, there's no bias with any smoothing method. Doesn't matter if it's good or bad. Okay? We happen to be in a situation where there's deferred losses. It would be the same if there were deferred gains.
Right.
It would take longer to recognize. So there's no bias. There's nothing
Yeah, I don't see
cooked in or
that as an
suspicious.
issue. I mean, I understand all that. I don't think that's an issue.
No, I
Our
just want
issue
to
is
be
we're
sure.
just digesting the losses or the low returns. It's going to take us longer with smoothing, but on the other hand, it's not as massive as it could have been without smoothing.
Correct.
As we're
Exactly.
digesting the low returns on the core investments.
And in a way, it gives you more time
So try
to
to
have
try
higher
to
returns offset
try
that
to return.
impact.
Try to.
Mhm.
That makes sense to me. It means we're going to be digesting longer, but lesser.
Right. Smaller bites and more time for the offsetting.
Gains.
So
Good
Pat,
markets.
over the long term, and let's back up a little bit, look at this globally. I mean, is there a better method that suits our plan that you're looking at here that helps us identify the plan in a better perspective?
I don't think so. I mean, we did the experience study last year. Our recommendation was to stay with this method.
Right.
And I kind of told you why I like it. I think in your specific situation, so you're funded largely, hopefully, by fixed contribution rates. So you need smoothing. You need as much smoothing as you can get, and then if the statutory rates aren't sufficient, the district has to come up with the remaining shortfall. And again, smoother is better there to create more stability in the contribution, so you're not
Which was
working.
which was kind of our goal with the $300 million pension obligation bond that we lost by a handful of votes, was to create. Actually, that was to create more stability too. Kind of the same assumption in a different methodology by loading in $300 million worth of investments. That's conceptually the same. By increasing the pool, it stabilizes.
So I think for OSERS and the way it is funded, I mean, some plans are funded differently. I think this method works, and I still like the fact that when you have a strong return, it sort of gets you back to market. And I also like knowing what's it take to not have a loss.
It kind of puts a little money in the bank if you're on the good side. You know, you've got a cushion going forward for a time that isn't so good.
Right. We've used it for a long, long time, and I think it's provided reasonable smoothing. It is harder to understand. It is for just a layperson. A non-actuary, how's that? For a non-actuary, it's harder to understand.
He only has a degree from Notre Dame, so you have to tell him twice.
That's right.
Yeah. But it's not a math degree. So
It's not a
no
math
reflection
degree.
on you. All right. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I'm glad we did take a chance to talk about
that's
it
good.
and just confirm that the board is comfortable with it. All right. So, page 13. Again, you'll see two columns of numbers because it's important for us to see what's happening to the market value, but what's driving the valuation results is the actuarial value of assets. So you can see in the January 1, 2017 valuation, again, the actuarial value is higher than market by $189 million. That's the deferred or unrecognized investment experience we talked about. We had $92 million come in contributions, 121 million payments out. So there's more cash going out than is coming in. That's pretty common. These plans are very mature. And that, if you look at that difference as a percent of market value, it's not extremely high. I think it's about 2.5%. Right. So end of the year, though, you can see the assets, market value is about 1.2 billion, actuarial 1.37. So we've narrowed the gap. We had 189 unrecognized in the 17 val. We've got 131. So we are digesting it. Rate of return we talked about earlier, 10% on market, that translated to 4% on actuarial because of the impact of the deferred experience. So just a reminder about what the actuarial accrued liability is. Remember, the method that we're using to finance these benefits is we're going to fund benefits while employees are actively working. That over their career, enough money is going to come in that with investment earnings, now at 7.5, there will be enough money when they retire to pay their benefit until they die or their beneficiary dies. That's the whole concept. So we know who's in the system, we know how long they've been working, we know what our assumptions are and what the benefit structure are, so we mathematically can say, well, given what the way we're funding, where should our assets be in January 2018? In a perfect world, where everything followed the actuarial assumptions and the ongoing costs have been made every single year, the assets would be equal to 2.136 billion.
And we assume all members are married.
Yes, but that only really affects the death benefit.
Okay.
The pre-retirement death benefit, because the automatic form is 5 years service.
Okay.
Okay. So again, that's sort of in a perfect world, and if that were the case, then all we have to worry about is paying for or funding the benefits for future years of service for people who are working in the future, right? If our assets were exactly equal to the actuarial accrued liability. Those plans, they're not equal. It's very unusual that they're spot on. Usually, at least in the last 10 years, there's an unfunded liability. There's just a difference between theoretically where the assets should be and where the value is, and you can see that there, and that difference is $771 billion. That's essentially the debt of the system. An additional amount has to be paid to cover that, in addition to what you're paying for people who are working and you're funding their benefits.
Or if our investment's earned. income, then that would reduce what we have to pay now.
Well, I mean, that's the C plus side. But remember, in the valuation, it knows nothing about, it assumes everything follows the assumption going forward.
All that would do is it would decrease over time if you had above your 7.5 rate. If we have,
It's all
if we
future.
consistently had 10 like this year, over time we'd catch up to the losses. Over time.
So it was 713 million last year, 771 this year. Again, the funded ratio we looked at earlier moved from 65 to 64. On smooth value, on market value, it improved, which is your 10% return. We would expect the 7.5. It was better than that. It improves the funded ratio.
What's the inverse? Is it up to 85% currently now?
It's in the mid 80s.
Mid
I
80s?
should have checked before I came. I'm sorry, but yeah. All right. So this is a look back all the way to 2002 at the funded ratio. Okay. So there's a big spike there in 2007, and I checked the evaluation to see what it was, but I don't remember exactly why. But there was a reset of the smoothing method to market at that point, and that's why you see that it goes from about 80 to 89. And then you can see it comes down.
So that had nothing to do with C plus I.
No, that was just a method change.
So it had nothing to do with contributions or income that
Or
increased it,
investments.
or investments, right?
Well, what that did was there was a difference. The actuarial value was lower than the market value.
But I mean,
Pretty
that
significant.
spike, yeah, okay, very good.
So we just put the money, so before we had some conservatism built in, because the actuarial value was lower, and we said we're going to cash it in, so to speak, and recognize it.
Okay.
Yeah. Timing's everything.
Okay.
And then you can see the decline. Remember, with smoothing, it takes a while for the impact of 2008 and 9 to flow through the smoothing method. Just a reminder, 2008 we had a return of about a -4, and then 9 it was -15. So all that sort of worked itself out, and we found ourselves, between 70 and 75, and then the big decrease last year is really, the assumption change. We had a loss on the actuarial value of assets as well, but we moved from 8 to 7.5.
Right.
Your assumed rate of return, again, C plus I will be. Basically, you're saying the I is coming down every year in the future. Its liabilities go up. So that's just kind of a glimpse.
I think what people always say when they see this, and this is the question I get from principals and others, is why doesn't the market, when the market has gone from 08, 6,600 on the Dow Jones or something, today's 24,000. How come that looks like that? And my answer always is because we're not really that exposed to market equities because we got out 50% of them in 2008. Is that accurate?
I can't speak to that, but
It's not accurate.
I would say, your returns in 2010, it was 10.5, 11.7, 8.3, 9.7, 13.3. Those don't seem terrible to me. It's really been, the last few years, I think.
As the smoothing digested the returns that were lower.
No, we looked at that earlier, remember? That difference between the blue line and the black line, no, we haven't digested it, and we won't even by 2024,
Yeah, it's going to take a while.
unless we have strong returns
More than 7.5%.
like that moves us back,
Or, for multiple years.
or one really strong like a
I mean,
19.
we went through the Great Recession, obviously, and that returns were down, and so it's taken a while to recognize those losses during all this
I
time.
thought I looked at the records and we did get out of market equities. About half of them went from 52% exposure to 26%. Is that not accurate? Somewhere in the fall of 08?
I don't remember I don't think it was that much, but we were
But
putting
the
them in.
returns were double digits, right?
Yeah. They could have been a different asset allocation and still produce returns
Double-digit
above the
returns.
assumed rate. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. I'm just saying it could be. But when I look at the historical returns, it's more short term than it's been 14, 15, 16, I think. All right. So prior slide, we saw the unfunded liability move from 713 to 771. Again, the evaluation, let's just dissect that and say what drove that change. And we talked about, a couple of the items. We talked about the investment loss on actuarial value of assets of $44 million, the liability loss of $12 million. Remember, the board's funding policy produced a higher additional contribution than what the district actually put in August of 17.
Because that was statutory.
Right, I'm not criticizing it, it's just factual. That's the $3 million, contributions less than actual rate. Okay? And then the expected increase, this is another thing I want to make sure the board understands. So the system's debt, the unfunded liability, is being paid off essentially as a percent of payroll. And even if the size of the group remains stable, which is kind of the general assumption, the payroll is going to increase over time. You got inflation. Well, you can shake your head no, but you won't be able to hire teachers if you don't keep pace with inflation, wage inflation, right? I mean, if you just think 20 years out, let's say teachers don't get any increases and everybody else gets 2.5% increase. In 20 years, 50%. So you can go work at a quick shop for more than you can teach. I mean, it won't happen. But I'm just saying, at least the assumption is that payroll is going to grow over time, which the money's coming in as 8% of payroll. So the payment schedule, the amortization schedule, when you look at your own personal mortgage, so if it's $500 a month, it's $500. This is not. It's 500, and then it'd be 500 times 1.0375. And then the next one goes up another 375. It's increasing dollars, level percent of pay. Okay? When you have a long period, and last year we were at 27 years on the biggest piece of the unfunded liability, that means because as you go further out, the dollars really are increasing dramatically. First year, you're 27, your payment didn't cover the interest on the unfunded liability by design. Okay, that's not actual gain or loss, that's by design, which is why we give it its own line here. It's not it's expected. It's the expected increase in the UAL due to the amortization method. So it went up $7 million. It's not a huge number,
right?
But it's just important to know, even if all assumptions are met, the dollar amount is going to go up until you're probably about down to 16 or 17 years. So we have, potentially another 10 years, it's going to go up and then kind of start coming down. But as trustees, it's important for you to understand the dynamics here. The gains and losses are the 44 and the 12. And we had favorable experience, kind of all other things accounted for. But that's what kind of drove us from 713 to 717.
So in looking at this chart and coming down the column, understanding that we started off with a unfunded liability of 713, we were expecting an increase of 7. The ARC payment last year actuarially was 15.5, but the district put in the 12.7, so that's the difference of the 3. If the district had put in, 15.5, let's say they had put in 17.5, that would have been a -2.
Right.
A gain of 2.
Yes.
Okay. And that, okay.
And if they put in exactly the
15, and it would have been 0.
Zero. And we do that just because we need to break down pieces. Again,
So we understand where it, right.
Yeah, it's just, when you say, well, how do you go 713 to 771, we break down each piece because the projected UAL assumes the full actuarial contribution comes in. That's why it shows up that way as an increase. Just like in your own personal mortgage, whatever your scheduled payment is what drives the next balance.
Right. And if you pay more, you're paying on the principal.
Right.
Right.
Or if your investments come in higher, then,
Right.
I mean, either way.
It's a moving,
Either way.
Mhm.
or a moving target. Yeah. Lots of things. Okay. All right, so we've made it to contribution rates. I mentioned this earlier. So the funding policy says that we're going to accumulate assets over each employee's working career that when they reach retirement will be sufficient to pay their benefits. Okay? So every year, for somebody who's actively working, there's a cost. Well, different people have different costs depending on which group they're in and what their entry age was and their salary, and so we aggregate that all together, and that gives us the normal cost for the plan. Okay? Things that impact that, assumptions. When we changed assumptions last year, the normal cost went up, and largely because instead of earning 8, instead we're going to earn 7.5. So the cost of what it takes to fund or finance the benefits went up. The second piece is a payment on that unfunded actuarial accrued liability. The plan is trying to be funded on what we call an actuarial basis, which means the current assets and the present value of future contributions is equal to the present value of the benefits. Think of a scale. And the present value of the benefits is driving. We've got some assets, and then we've got to bring assets into the future. The stream of the assets, we've got normal cost for every active person until they're gone. And then we've got a debt payment on the unfunded liability coming in over different periods. Okay? This calculation is based on the Board of Trustees funding policy developed back in 2013, ahead of 2013. We already talked about we're developing the payment schedule as a level percent payroll, assuming payroll increases. If it doesn't, it self-corrects over time, but that's the assumption. And we're using what's called a layered amortization approach. So, and that was a recent change, the layers. That was with the experience study. So in the funding policy that began in 2013, we started with a closed 30-year period. Closed simply means it goes down by one every time we do evaluation every year. So in 2013, it was 30, 2014 it was 29, and 28. Okay, so we're down to 26 years remaining on the legacy, and that's the big one. Okay. The legacy UAAL. And then new pieces of unfunded liability, like we just measured this year, the 44 million loss on assets and the 12 million loss on liabilities, the impact of the assumption changes last year. Those bases are amortized over 25 years, okay, not 30, but a new period that starts the day we measure it. So the assumption changes, we started 1/1/17, went 25 years, 2032. This year is 2018, 25 years forward. We get to 1/1/19, gain or loss base 2019, 25 years forward. Hence the layers.
What's the point of being 100% funded if you're not going to have the employees anymore to pay into the retirement system? If it keeps getting smaller and smaller, what is the benefit of being 100% funded?
Well, if you don't have actives, you really, really want to be 100% funded because you need the money to pay the benefits. You think about, there aren't very many of them, but if you think about a plan that's been closed for a long time, it still has a lot of liability to be paid to retirees. So if you don't have 100% funding, then someone has to put the money in, or the benefits can't be paid.
So is this getting us ready then to be a cash basis then, instead of a defined benefit plan?
No. This is basically saying actuarial funding is all about assigning costs to periods of time. Okay, and there's been a lot of work done, a lot of papers written about amortization periods and it used to be that open 30s were not uncommon. Don will back me up on this. Very much out. And it's because I think we've come through a period where, we've had significant losses come through, and the 30-year open, you just, I hate to use that term, but kicking the can down the road. You're just refinancing every year, okay? And that's not accepted as being, I think, prudent or
standard
fiscally
practice.
Yes, fiscally responsible.
And we didn't want to do that years ago, several years ago, which is why we put this in place, even though
Right.
we wouldn't have had to at the time, because we wanted to recognize this, we wanted to get this taken care of, and that's why we made that decision. And what does the state use today?
The state uses the layered approach. Their layers are 30. They've been doing layered for a long time. Actually, we're kind of ahead of the curve on that one. I don't know how far back it goes, but it's, I would say, at least 10 years. But they have statutorily, their board does not set that. That's in statute. But it's 30 years. So each base, every year we create a new base
Maybe
over
30
the
years
next
here.
30 years.
So it's
Why
open
are we
then?
25
No,
instead of 30?
each one is a closed 30-year base.
Close 30, but why are we 25 instead of 30 then?
Well, I'm going to speak to that because the board actually spent a lot of time on funding policy. Again, it was ahead of, I think we started maybe in 2011.
It's been a while.
Again, if you look, the GFOA recommends a period not to exceed 25. The Conference of Consulting Actuaries issued a white paper, kind of best practices, recommended practices for public pension plan funding. And they actually like shorter periods, 15 to 20 years, especially for gains or losses.
I can see why they would like that, but I'm thinking about
Well-
the employees I got to lay off to make the payments, because that's going to make the payment higher. Would 30 be a lesser arc if it was 30 instead of 25?
Right
And
now,
so
right
we
now.
could digest it more slowly instead of having to find this year it's 26 million, 18 and a half for the ARC payment, and next year I think it goes up to 21 million. So if we were at 30, maybe it would stay at 18, 19 million, maybe 20 instead of going to 21, 22. I mean, that's presumption, I understand, but wouldn't that allow us to digest that so we don't have to lay off as many people to capture the dollars that we're having to pay for the ARC?
Now,
All I
Does it-
can
does
tell
it
you
make
is
the
the
ARC
math. I
payment-
mean,
Does the math make the ARC payment less if we go 30
yes,
instead of 25?
you have a debt. If you pay it off over a longer period of time, the payment is smaller. In today's dollars,
Right.
obviously, over time, it's higher. I mean, it's like
I
any
understand a
debt.
15-year mortgage and a 30-year
Yeah.
mortgage.
It's
But I also
exactly.
digest what I'm doing right now to people I'm looking eyeball to eyeball. So I'm thinking, if I can digest it over time
so if
and not have
the,
that conversation.
But Mark, with all due respect, we're not trying to design a policy to help you. I mean, I understand what you're doing.
Helping them.
Helping the
ones losing their
district.
jobs.
I understand that. Help
It's
the
not gonna
district.
help the district,
That's
help
not
the
what
people
we're
losing
trying to
their
do
jobs.
here. We don't. You have to figure out a way to fund this.
Well, we have to
We
make the
don't.
law.
We're coming up with what's fiduciarily responsible for the retirement system. What you do over there, you keep bringing it up.
Well,
I
because
understand
it impacts it. That 30-year does impact it, and we can ignore it and say it doesn't, but it does. 90 people lost their jobs. We had to meet with them the last 2 weeks. It's real, and it's real because we've got an ARC payment. So I understand it's not your responsibility. I understand those.
We're here as
folks lose their jobs.
fiduciaries for the system.
And I want
not
the system to be
district.
good too, but does 30-year versus 25 make it not good? Because the state's on 30-year, Emperor's is.
Would they have to pay an ARC if they were using our funding policy?
I don't know. I mean,
I think they would change it if they had to.
There's been discussions, from what I understand, of the state moving to our plan, to the way we are.
I don't know.
I've talked to
I look
them
at the
on
rubber
board.
meeting the road, and maybe I shouldn't, but I do. And I recognize in 2 months it's not my problem, but I still see the faces of the people that are impacted. And maybe I shouldn't, but I do. Because that is an impact. But I understand the difference between a 15-year mortgage and a 30-year, or a 25 and a 30. I understand that. But I recognize the challenge we're in today.
But what this change would be going to a 30-year mortgage, that the next year it's 30 years again. And now it's 30
Well,
years again, right? And
I
it
think
just-
there's different approaches here. I don't think you're talking about an open 30.
I'm talking about closed 30.
I think he's talking about the state uses the same layered approach, but their period is 30 rather than 25. Okay? So each year, like our gain or loss this year would have been over 30 years, not 25. Just remember, when you have a gain, that means you don't gain
recognize
over
it.
32.
Right.
You can't say, well, how a gain's over
Understand.
25 and
No,
loss
that's
is over 30.
Yeah.
So right now, it might help, but if you have gains, it'll work the opposite way.
Yeah.
I just wanted you to understand, and I know, what the actuarial community says or the GFOA may not be valuable, but there's a reason that those entities are weighing in on that, and that's because, it's in everybody's best interest to make sure that these plans are funded. And the sooner the money comes in, the better funded they get. There's trade-offs.
There is.
And that's the trade-off.
That's the trade-off. Is
Yeah.
how much of an impact
Yeah.
and how severe. And that's the challenge we have today. So I get it. No, I get it.
Pat, am I correct that the state uses level dollar as opposed to level percentage?
Don, they changed that
Okay.
after the financial crisis
Okay.
returned, so that they did for a lot of years. They used level dollar payments, and then they moved to level percent of pay for school control and judges.
So that restated every amortization base? But the original one might have still been.
I think they probably took the balance maybe and
I think you did. I think there's reference to level dollar,
Yeah.
which may have been kind of their legacy.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about
Yeah.
that.
I'm pretty sure
But
they're
that's
all
an
level.
important distinction. In fact, it's true.
Oh, it's huge, yeah.
Yeah.
But I can double check for you on that, but I'm relatively sure that they're all level percent of pay because that
Okay.
lowered the contribution after the 2008-9 returns. One movement. All right. So, said that. So, when we look at this, we talked about normal costs, only applies to actives. The cost and benefits for active members. And it doesn't matter if you're 120% funded or 60% funded, the normal cost rate is the normal cost rate.
So it
It's
went
down a
down.
little bit. We expect that to kind of continue. As, again, we have the Tier 1 folks leaving and being replaced now in Tier 4. We'll see that trend down just a little bit each year. The unfunded liability, we had an increase, so the payment goes up. So it's 1405, that gives us 2705. When you look at the statutory contribution rates, members, the district, and the state, 21.66% total. So the contribution shortfall, the additional required district contribution, is 5.39%. Projected pay is $350 million. So we end up at $18.9 million this year. So you can see the rate, the shortfall as a percent of payroll increased from 4.63 to 5.39.
And you expect this to increase?
Yeah, I'm going to show you a slide. So we use a smoothing method. We're hoping there's highs and lows that average out. But the reality check is, if we were using pure market, which recognizes all the difference, so that 131 million difference in value, boom, hits this year. Okay, that's not going to happen next year. But this is more just trend, kind of a trend line over the longer term where what would we expect. And this just shows you, far right is market value, the left-hand column is actuarial value. So the unfunded liability on a market value basis is just over 91 million. And the funded ratio is 58. We saw that earlier.
It doesn't, when we get rated for bonds and stuff, they use the market value, don't they, for unfunded liability?
What I have found is the bond rating agencies are developing their own liability numbers, and then I assume using market. But the bond rating agencies generally have their own way of calculating liabilities.
But Connie, the the market value is what's going to appear in the GASB 68.
Good point.
Yeah.
That will drive it. So then on the contribution rate side, again, normal cost is not impacted by funded ratio. But you can see that the contribution on the unfunded actuarial accrued liability, would go up from just over 14 to close to 16 and a half. That drives the total up. Obviously, the statutory rates don't change, so it pushes that contribution shortfall up 5.4 to 7.4. Now, again, this isn't going to happen. The investment returns and all the other experience is going to have an impact. And as you go further out, and payroll's higher, as we recognize that the rates are not exactly this. But what this tells you is, yes, I think in the short term, we should expect it to go up, absent a really strong return or a sustained period of returns above 7.5. So 10% for 3 or 4 years, that'll make it up too. But this is, again, just to give you kind of a glimpse of what the trend is. We're not predicting, we're not saying it's going to be 27.3 million. But when we did the projections, you kind of saw the gradual
About
tick
$3
up.
million a year.
Yeah, that's more gradual as it goes out. Again, when we talk about at the very beginning, I said we're trying to look at trends and make you aware of it, because that's what we're trying to do in this slide.
Can we go back to page 18 just for a second?
You bet.
Something here I'd like to talk a little bit about. When you look at the additional required district contribution, the bottom number, in 17, it was 15.5 million. That was what was on your report last year. Okay, but the district only paid $12.7 million. Wouldn't that mean that they underpaid their required contribution?
Well,
I'd ask Connie the same question.
Statute has an open 30-year period until OB 1005 got passed. So we followed what was the law.
So I don't know if anybody has seen this publication that's gone out. It's a publication for the bond, which is all fine. But there's one question on here, and I just want to read this to the board. There's a kind of a question and answer session on here. Question number 5. There have been rumors that the district was not making its annual required contribution to its retirement plan. Is that true? I'll repeat it. There have been rumors that the district was not making its annual required contribution to its retirement plan. Is that true? They answered the question, no. The district has always made payments to its retirement account each year as required by law. Now, if you read that sentence, technically that's correct, but it's really only part of the story. And using this logic, it would be like saying the building's on fire, the law requires us to throw 2 buckets of water on hope that puts the fire out, but the fire chief told us it takes 3 buckets, but we only have to do 2, so that's all we're going to come up with. That's kind of where we are. I think this kind of comment in a publication like this is disingenuous, it's half-truth, and it's sending the wrong message to those people who read this. And I don't appreciate that, because there's more to it. You can go back over time and look at the years the district was not making this contribution that was being told to us by the actuary.
But we were
The
making what was
legislature
required by law.
recognized that, which is the reason why they put in place a law, so now you have to do it. They changed the statute requiring you now to do this. Last year, the district utilized a loophole in the law to pay the smaller amount, and this year the law was corrected so that can't happen in the future. Now, you smile about this, Connie, but that's the
not
truth
true.
of the matter. What is not true?
The law had a 30-year open period. That's what we followed.
I didn't say you didn't follow the law. You did follow the law. But there's more to the story than just following the law. If you knew that we needed more contributions to meet our funding policy to get to our 100% funding, those were the amounts that should have been put in place. You talk to Senator Colterman, they'll tell you the same kind of thing. That's what is believed in the legislature. I just want to bring that point up because I know that that's getting spread around, and now I see it put in print. I know that's being talked to by people, but it's just simply not the case. There's more to this story than what this says. You can say we followed the law, but gee, we should have been putting in more money. I mean, you knew that the system was underfunded years ago and did nothing about it. I mean, it's been in your audit report for several years now. You know, this report went to the board every year. You could see that it needed more funding. You didn't do anything about it. So it's a matter of underfunding here.
Why did you increase benefits to retirees?
When was
the state
that?
Did not.
When was that?
It's in the reports if you read those as well. You had a different policy than what the state had, which led to part of our problem that we have today.
I don't think that's accurate.
I can show you the report.
Show me the report, because we did not increase benefits unless the state senator said that we could increase benefits. We have never asked for benefit increases at the state legislature without approval. Never.
I don't even think we're allowed to. We're not even allowed to ask them for
You have
increase.
different benefits on the
Well,
floor
they
of
were
the
different.
legislature.
They were a different
On
plan,
the
of
floor,
course.
when they were testifying about LB 1005, they talked about the benefits that you were offering versus what the state of Nebraska did.
What benefits were what were the different benefits resulted? My recollection is that we had a different benefit structure for COLA.
Medical COLA.
And the state had a 2.5% COLA. We had a 1.5% COLA. We had a smaller automatic COLA. We chose, instead of having a large automatic COLA, to take that money and put it into a medical benefit for people which benefits people who have lower salaries. There was nothing adverse about that. We took the money we're going to put into the COLA and put it into a different kind of COLA. To say we have different benefits and that's what caused the problem is not accurate. Another thing is being said here that's not accurate is that you're blaming the pension system for all the people you're laying off. The truth of the matter is there's $11 million shortfall of state aid. I never hear that being mentioned, that he's a whipping boy. Using the pension system as a whipping boy for why you have to lay people off. That's also a bit insulting.
Well, you're not sitting in the room with people with tears in their eyes. Okay, so all I can say is, if our investment returns, we're like inverse. We're not having that conversation. I'm not in that room with people with tears in their eyes. I know I'm not supposed to talk about that because I've heard that's not the issue here, and I get it. But I'm in the room with people with tears in their eyes. And if our investment returns were the same as inverse, we wouldn't be in this conversation. Roger, I don't have another way of saying it. Inverse isn't having this conversation.
Well, maybe if we said if the district had been putting in more contributions along, we wouldn't be in this
Did
situation
Inverse have to
either.
put in more contributions?
I'm not talking about IMPERS.
Well, my
I'm
point
talking
of
about
story.
this system. I don't care about their system. We're talking about our system. This doesn't say anything about IMPERS. It just talks about OSERS. It doesn't say anything about IMPERS. You know that you're not telling the whole story. There's more to this story, and you're not getting it out, and that's what has me a little bit upset. I apologize for that, but
Well, I think everyone feels the same level of emotion. We're involved in budget reductions. It's a hell of a thing to have to do. Tell a person to walk through.
but just give the facts. Just say the fact. The facts are what they are. I won't argue with facts. The facts are, last year you were supposed to put in $15.5 million. You put in 12.7. That's a fact. That's not. I didn't make that up.
The fact is what the law is as well. At that time, the law required
Yeah,
the
you're both right.
12.7.
You're
I mean,
both right. I think you're right. I think she's right. You're both right.
I didn't
I'm not
say she was
arguing
wrong.
with
She
you.
is
I'm not
right.
saying one of your
She is
lawyers-
right, but
you're
there's
both right.
more to it. You should have put in more. You should have put in what the actuary told you to put in. It would have made our unfunded less this year. We just showed
By
you
$2 million.
this year.
I mean-
now you want to start going back year after year and looking at it?
It's a terrible spot to work.
Now, I don't think that's
Okay, but don't be blaming everything on OSERS, and that's the message you're sending to everybody. I mean, I know what you're saying. I know what things are being said. I know it. Don't tell them half the truth. Tell them the whole truth.
And I'd say the same for everybody else at the table.
And I'm
Tell
doing
them
my
all
best
through
to do
bond
that.
investments and tell them our returns, and I think that would change some of the feelings that the board table that you're reflecting and some of the things that God is reflecting.
I don't think the benefits to all to compare IMPERS and OSERS. It's like comparing two children. Like one got into Harvard, the other had special needs.
What about our
I think
teachers?
we ought
Don't
to
you-
stop that kind of comparison and talk about what we're going to try to do to make this plan go forward.
Don't our teachers deserve the same benefits as any other teacher in the state of
Absolutely.
Nebraska?
I'm not saying we don't not talk about the benefits. I'm saying let's stop making comparisons about the funding into let's figure out what we're going to do about for this plan going forward.
Okay. I think we've already got what's going forward. We're going to have to continue, right? Increasing the ARC payment by approximately $3 million a year. which means in 5 more years, it's going to be 15 million on top of the existing 19. So we're starting to get into 25s, 30 millions. That's what Pat would say. And so there is our answer. We have the answer, and it's statutory. We have the answer. It's statutory. And that's what we're going to work on for the next 15 years. And so the answer is there. It's continuation of the committee that I serve on. And I'm not, like I said, we're in the spot. We're in the spot we're in. It's going to be nothing we can point fingers doesn't help anything. And so I'm not into that either. Let's just say.
And stop pointing fingers.
Well,
We're not pointing fingers really either. We're not trying to. Let's all stop pointing fingers. We tried to work together with the board a year ago, and it got us no place. So
I thought we were trying to work together on a pension obligation bond. We had trustees emailing folks, including folks with email senators, put a kibosh on it, and it worked. And that would have helped. But it didn't work because we had trustees actively, and you know that. It was in our last meeting where Lance talked about his emails telling everybody to rise up and call senators, and they did. So on one hand, you say work together. On the other hand, we as a body vote to be neutral on a legislative bill, and we got trustees emailing OEA members saying, don't support this stupidity, which is essentially what the email said. You heard it. So I don't think that serves us either, Don. I mean, it's not what
But again, that didn't come from the board. You know that didn't come from the board. I can't control what every member of this board does, but it wasn't an official position of the board. And
the legislators thought it was. When a trustee sends a note, you can't say, well, it's not from the trustees, it's just from me, who happens to be a trustee. It doesn't change. And so that died, and I think that would have helped us. But it died, because I think we need legislative help. That's what I think we need. Because I don't want to keep doing what Don and I are doing tomorrow night with finalizing position reductions across the district. It's just not long term. So I'm hopeful that we can get some legislative help. I thought the bill last year would have helped us. Obviously, Lance didn't agree. It's very difficult. We worked really hard to try to move forward on that, to do a $300 million infusion to assist. And so,
well, I think in the interest of time, Pat, please go ahead and finish your. I'm sorry to interrupt you here.
That's okay.
Sorry, Pat.
That's right. In fact, I think I'm pretty much done. We'll talk about everything on this
She's
slide.
sprinting out the door as she sprints away.
I have teenagers. I shouldn't use confrontation. It's different. No, just summary. I mean, we've touched on everything, on the actual lawsuit. The impact of the new tiers over time will be positive, but it's going to be a while. It doesn't help us in the short term. The challenge is definitely the short term. And then we talked about, given that unrecognized investment experience, at least the best glimpse forward is that there'll be additional different contributions in the short term, foreseeable future, increasing in amounts due to recognizing losses, but also expected increased payroll. And I know that's all in flux. Lots of things going on, as you described earlier, Dr. Evans. So we don't typically do projections with every valuation. We had done them in 17 with the new assumptions. We use those in the legislative session. If the board is interested in updating that, let me know. That could be done anytime. But that's not part of our regular routine work. You're giving me a face, Cecilia.
Because I missed a sentence and
The model.
the model.
The
Thank you.
model's
Thank you.
Part of
Okay.
the regular routine.
Yes.
Sorry,
Yes.
maybe wasn't clear.
No, my mind was going on to the next thing, and then when you said not part of the, I'm like, what?
Anyway, that concludes my formal presentation.
Pat, thank you.
That I can answer. I would
All right. Are there questions or further questions or discussion for Pat?
Oh, my.
All right. Then seeing none, I would ask for a motion to accept the January 1, 2018 evaluation report.
Motion.
It's been moved and seconded now. Is there any discussion on the motion? All right, seeing none, you may call the roll.
Havlicek.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Ray.
Aye.
Ripa.
Aye.
Evans.
Aye.
And Erickson.
Aye.
6 ayes.
Okay.
Can I ask a question about this board? So there will not be any further revisions. We can accept this as the final report. Is that correct?
I believe so.
The PDF that I sent you, yes. And then you'll get a final report, which I will ensure that it goes up on our website. You guys will have a copy, and I will file it with the school district.
Should we take
Should we come more often?
Yeah.
Okay, why don't we take a 10-minute recess?
I will.
We'll come back and we'll have Jack is on the phone for a legislative update.
John, it's good to see you. Take care. I was disappointed about the IFRS.
Yeah, it would have been fun, but they probably made an open choice. I think I got on the wrong side of Gretchen on that.
Oh, perhaps.
I understand
haven't
she-
met the new trustee over there.
I don't know if he's actually been officially appointed. I mean,
Okay.
there may
Maybe
be
has
a
been approved or
very likely at the meeting, but
Okay.
I heard that Gretchen was, she brought it up to me, and then I think she lost her nerve a little bit, thinking that I'm a little bit more, not so much activist, and she kind of wanted the activist. And I mean, he's obviously very capable
He's
of doing the
investment,
job.
right?
Yeah, he's an investment guy, so.
Yeah.
And probably 85% of the work is on that. So.
investment board, yeah.
But yeah, that's all I know. Is I was told that was she's very close to the governor and staff. So they got to rely upon somebody
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, it's, you definitely want to have the people with the expertise on the board.
Right. Yeah, I have no quarrel at all with him. I mean, he's very capable from what I said. But I also did cover he had made some activist observations along the way about the structure. Well, that's fine. Let's wait and see how it goes on.
Yeah.
He's giving us the thumbs up. Okay. I'm gonna call on Bob right now. We're gonna bring an item out of the
The director's report.
director's report having to do with fiduciary liability insurance, and he's been doing some work on this the last week or so, and so Bob can then leave afterwards.
Sure. Cecilia contacted me and asked me to look at, Cecilia inquired about the fiduciary liability policy that comes from Chubb through the Harry A. Koch, or maybe it's federally, they're owned by Chubb. And the policy, and I apologize, I have the 17-18 policy. I do not have the proposed 18-19, but I'm guessing it's the same. The premium's the same, so my comments are based on the policy that's in existence now, and not that would be in existence. I think it starts on
May 1.
May 1. So I guess it is.
Yeah.
The new one's in existence. So there's a couple observations, and I think this is an oversight, but the policy as it exists now ensures 9 different trusts or plans of the Omaha Public School District, including OSERS, the retirement system. And all the plans of the district that are insured are listed on the cover of the policy. So one suggestion I would have is that it may be to the benefit of both the district and OSERS if OSERS simply had its own fiduciary policy and moved away from being included in the Omaha Public School District policy. And I think that a contact should be made, Cecilia or somebody with the Harry Koch or with the agent that writes for the OPS policy. I don't see any reason why you move from that agency. He's familiar with it, they're familiar with it, but you should be your own insured, all right? The second comment I have is a question that Cecilia has asked me, and that is, why have the policy? And I think that because we no longer handle any investments by law, The board is responsible for administering the non-investment affairs of the retirement system. And the board exercises those duties, this is by statute, as fiduciaries. And so the fiduciary policy covers any negligent act, error, or omission in the administration of the policy, or of the system. So the policy covers what you do now, and that's administer the system. There are 3 members of the board that are not OPS employees: Don, Roger, Don. So I would think if I sat in their chair, I would want to have a fiduciary policy at the OSERS level. It may be that the employees of the Omaha Public School District are covered by one of their plans, Delane, Jim, I don't know, but certainly the 3 that are not employees are not covered by the Omaha Public School District. So you want a plan, and you want a fiduciary liability plan. This plan has $10 million of coverage, and that plan, that was the amount of coverage that was on May 1st of 17, and I bet it goes back a number of years at that level. And now that you don't have any responsibility for the investments of the system, all of that responsibility is passed to the state, I think the question that you need to discuss, or at least you need to determine, is do you need $10 million of coverage? I think the answer to that is no. I can't imagine you'd have a hiccup in the administration of the plan, and I listened with interest about in the closed session about the beneficiary that's just arisen now. And so I started thinking, that's maybe a hiccup, maybe not. But I can't think of, Cecilia and I we talked about maybe you would have a miscalculation somehow in a determination of a whole month's benefits, but you're not going to have a big miscalculation. So I guess the question I'd have, and the suggestion is, do you need $10 million? And the answer to that's probably no. The policy currently has a $100,000 deductible. And the question is, do you need that deductible, or could you increase that deductible? I think the issue of increasing the deductible bounces back to the district, because if you had a claim, if you increase the deductible and you had a claim and you had to fund the deductible, that funding is going to create a loss to the district, and you're going to bounce right back into, contributions, because it's going to flow through. It's going to flow through. So I don't know the answer to that. I just point that out.
I understand.
So I think that those were my conclusions. I think to Cecilia that you should have the policy. Absolutely. I don't think you need $10 million of coverage, and I think the question of what you do with the deductible is kind of a business decision. It is a business decision between the district and the board, because if there is a claim that goes above the deductible, you're going to bounce right back into. So that's my report on the liability policy.
So then the question, Bob, then that policy is like, what the premium is $37,600 this next year, right?
Yes, it is. It's
Okay.
$37,560.
And it covers these 9 different entities or plans. Trusts. Now, is that $10 million for each one of these, or is that?
No, it was a claim.
Each loss.
Each loss under the umbrella.
So if each one of these had a loss, there'd be $9 million. I mean, potentially it could be. I mean, I know that would.
Potentially, I suppose you could.
So we were covered by $10 million,
Yes.
just like everybody else. Okay.
But if you go your own way, the question is, do you need $10 million?
So then, the payment that we were making, the 37, whatever it has been over the years, we were then paying for all these other plans or trusts?
I suppose arguably, I mean, the answer to that's yes, but that's, to me, that's kind of water over the dam. I mean, it's occurred, and question is, can you should probably put an end to that now on a go-forward basis. I mean, given the meeting you're about to have tomorrow night on, I'm not sure that getting into dispute about those levels of dollars is understandable.
But, so what's going to happen then is, let's say we get our own plan for $5 million, whatever it is. And the district then would just need to decide it wants another plan of $10 million for what's remaining, or whatever they
Yes,
choose.
that's
up
a
to them.
district
We get carved
decision.
out.
We'd get carved out. We'd get our own plan, and then the district would make its decision at that point.
Going back to deductible, who covers the amount up to the?
To me, right now, OPS covers it because it's going to fund. You could tap investments, whatever, to cover the deductible. But when she comes in here next year and gives her calculations, it's all going to flow
6.5 dozen.
right back to yes,
6.5 dozen.
right back
Okay.
to OPS.
But there is a problem with OSERS funds being used to pay premiums for non-OSERS expenditures.
In the
I mean, from a principal perspective, I have a problem with that.
From a principal perspective, OSERS probably shouldn't have done that. But, Don, that's only occurred since probably 2 years, May of 16 and 17, since you had since LB 447, since you kind of severed, since you have a true plan sponsor and a plan, and they're separate at this point. I think you're only looking at a couple of years.
But even back in those days, though, if we were paying the premium for the 403B plan, which we have nothing to do with, we shouldn't have been doing that either, technically.
The cost of the premium was allocated based on the assets. All of the assets were with OSERS. So that's why it was allocated that way. But we're happy to drop that plan if that's what you would like.
So the assets of the 403B are part of OSERS?
No.
Or whatever those others were?
They allocated the premium cost based on the assets that are being held. And at the time you had all of the assets because you were doing the investing.
The 403B is a voluntary, it's off at whoever's.
We don't collect, yeah.
We just collect the money and send it to
whatever
the
financial-
provider, the financial provider that the member has selected.
And
We've always had a 403B, and we wouldn't have had fiduciary insurance for that before. The only reason they had it was because of the OSERS plan.
At some point it got added under this umbrella,
But it is an umbrella.
I think it was a school board member that wanted it. Had it before. When did Landon wanted this? 4 years
What
ago or
time?
something? I think it was, because we didn't have it before. It's very recent, as I recall.
So we want a motion to move forward, or what?
Well, I think maybe at this point,
instructions to the director to investigate and come back with
some options.
some options from Harry Koch.
And we can do that the next meeting. When is this premium?
But it's probably you want it paid now, and Harry Koch, they should be able to adjust that.
And
without-
they'll do that.
You bet.
So now I'm on several boards where the organization carries separate directors and officers liability policy. Is that part of this policy, or is that a separate? Are we covered? Well, so let's say
And that's
OSERS is sued or OPS is sued, and they start naming individual people within that suit.
OPS, we're covered as employees. OSERS, I have to have a discussion. We should be covered as OPS employees, but I'll have a discussion.
That goes back to these three who are not
But
employees.
just, right, you may not have been in the room. Right, yes, we did discuss that, yes. So it goes back to the three.
Okay.
I'm not aware if there's any type of a D&O policy for OSERS. There's certain policies that OSERS wants OPS to keep, like cybersecurity, things like that, because a lot of this stuff is done electronically. So we're good with OPS having cybersecurity policies.
So with the deductible, then it's if I'm named or if we're all named as part of the suit somewhere, do we need to each come up with our share of the deductible, or is
No,
that
you're going to have, by law, in all likelihood, OSERS will cover that deductible.
we will have that clarified. Yes.
So do you want me to cancel the fiduciary
No,
insurance?
don't cancel it.
No.
Don't cancel.
Don't cancel it. We'll let you know when it can be canceled. When
So
we
this
can
year
convert.
it's going to be effective?
Just go ahead and,
Yes,
go ahead and
it's
pay it.
not for the
Connie.
year. It's going to
It'll
go
be
effective
adjusted.
on May 1st. That's, I think, the policy date, so it went effective yesterday. That's fine. But if we get our own policy June 1st or July 1st, Terry
They
Cole
will
will prorate.
adjust it, right.
They'll adjust.
Right.
An interesting comparison is the per board down in Lincoln. Every per board member gets paid $50 per meeting. And when we asked something, why are we doing that? It's because I make sure the employee of the state, which allows the state then to step in and contribute. Maybe the solution is to pay the non-employee members a small salary so that we can be considered employees.
Well, I don't know that you would be considered an employee. This is a separate trust.
I'm not sure that would work.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it. Any other questions about that before we let Bob go? Cecilia will come back at the next meeting in June, whenever that is, and we'll have some options to choose from.
Do we need a motion to have Cecilia to do that?
No, those are just instructions. We're not binding anything.
We're going to get Jack Peets on the line for the legislative update.
Second reading this.
Probably.
Okay, Jack, you are on the phone, and let me inform you that who's in the room: Delane Havlovic, Jim Ripa, Don Erickson, Roger Ray, Don Jones, Mark Evans, Connie Kanoki, and Henry Cordes.
Okay, good.
And me.
Thank you for giving me some time.
All right, you're up. Legislative update.
Okay, LB 548, which, as you know, was introduced last year. That was kind of a merger of the administration of OSERS into the state, as well as the state at some point in time taking over the OSERS plan and merging it into the state. That did not get out of committee until late this year, and that came out as an amendment for the pension bonding. That bill, 548, though, because it didn't go anywhere, and this is the second year of the biennium died. It was IPP'd at the end of the year, so that bill, as you see it, 548, is no longer in existence. The bill that carried some of the cleanup for a lot of different retirement programs was 1005, which was kind of a shell bill that several different legislative proposals were merged into. That one passed, and most of the provisions in it carried the emergency clause and was signed by the governor, so that one is pretty much in effect now. And as that related to OSERS, it defined the solvency issue, so there's a little bit more structured definition of what solvency is determined under the plan. And it also required the use of an actuarial study in order to determine what solvency is. There was some rollover definition in there as well, and then, of course, it had the date of August 31st in there for any additional payment from the district on the UAAL has to be made by August 31st of each year. Now, that August 31st date just means that whatever is needed to be paid that year has to be paid by that date. In visiting with Senator Coleman and some of the committee members, the intention there is, if for budgeting purposes there is an amount that is expected to be paid at the end of the year, that can be paid in increments or sporadically during the year. It doesn't have to wait until August 31st to be paid. So for budgeting purposes, that amount from the actuary can be spread out over the year and paid in, which is, for the benefit of OSERS, would probably be best because it would be paid to the state, invested, and there would be some earnings on that as you go forward. There was also in that a outsourcing. If you recall, we talked about that before. There is some thought that maybe certain sections of a employer's employee base would be outsourced. Say, for example, nothing specific, but with reference to any district, but say transportation bus drivers, if they are a part of the retirement program now and for some reason they get outsourced and it's contracted to a private entity, at the time the outsourcing takes place, I think it's not within 90 days after that, the employees are no longer employees in the retirement system, but the retirement system still is responsible for the retirement benefits of those folks who were in that plan during the time they were in the plan. So it requires the employer to get an actuarial study to determine what the future liability is for the time that those folks were in the plan, and then that employer has to pay it into the plan, so the plan is left holding that liability, but with no additional income coming in from contributions and a share of that employee's wages. That I don't think affected OSERS yet, but I think next year is when that probably will come in, because I think there's some language that has to be integrated into the OSERS statutes to get that same effect for OSERS. The only other thing, I know you're probably a little bit tight on time, the interim studies that are out there, you have 368, which is Senator Coleman, and 369. Those are the standard ones that allow the retirement committee to review the unfunded plans and to review plans in general. And generally, those are in November or December. And I think this last year we had them in December, but they were delayed a little bit. And those are standard language ones, so they will continue to watch them, but those are ones that most likely you'll be aware of and be in attendance at. Lindstrom, the one on public safety officers, that one's there, but I don't think it really affects OSERS that much. 396 is an interim study that was presented to the body by Senator Lowe. That one, early on in the session, Senator Lowe, I think, wanted to introduce a bill which kind of did the same thing that his legislative resolution 396 is attempting to do here, but that was discouraged by Senator Coleman as chairman of the retirement committee, and it was discouraged for one primary reason is that those types of bills need to be introduced in the first year of a 2-year session. They need to be introduced in the 90-day session as opposed to the 60-day session. So this one may come up, and it may be combined with another hearing on legislative resolution by the retirement committee later in the year. I don't know whether or not Senator Lowe did this on his own. I did visit with him a little bit about it. And as you know, there are those two bills that were produced last year involving the Omaha and Lincoln police and fire unions that dealt with reviewing the defined benefit plans. I think some of that background there is the RSI group and the Arnold Foundation. This looks a little bit like that, but Senator Lowe indicated he did this based on some discussions he had with some of his constituents. So I would not be surprised if we see a bill in that regard from Senator Lowe come in next year. Other than that, there's not a whole lot that is going on. There is a little bit of jockeying for position right now with some committees. Most of the senators that are up for re-election are back working on their election campaigns. So there's this time of year, because there may be some of those who were chairs that are either term limited, such as Senator Smith, or there may be some like Senator Groney, who's chair of education, that Smith, of course, is term limited. Groney did not have an opponent, but now has one on a write-in basis. So he most likely, if he comes back, will want to stay as chair of education. If he doesn't come back, then that chair is open, and there would be some discussion there. I think there's been some discussion with senators now as to where they would like to go as chairs of different committees, but those are all preliminary discussions before they start spending quite a bit of time on trying to get other senators to agree to support him, and I think most of that will happen after the primary and then certainly after the general election and close to the end of the year. So, if you have any questions specifically, I can go ahead and answer those. Otherwise, I don't want to get you behind the line in the cafeteria.
I think also just a little bit more clarification on LB 1005 with regard to Section 79-9 113 little c. In addition to that new language providing a date certain for the contributions into the OSERS plan, like Jack said, going forward for 2019, there's nothing to preclude pre-funding what is coming up for 19. Also, the section codified that additional contributions above even the 101% are permissible into the plan. So, as we start thinking through things for the future, there are options out there for helping to fund the OSERS plan. And now it's been codified.
Okay. Well, and one other thing on the bonding issue that came up, and that was an amendment that came out of 548, and I think a number of certainly OPS wanted it out there. We encouraged, and I visited with John Lindsay and Rochelle, and we met with a couple senators for the purpose of getting that out of committee to the floor in order for some debate to see what the issues were on that. And I think if you watch the debate on that was really, really pretty good. Probably one of the best debates of the year.
Mm-hmm. It was. I agree. It was.
And I think a number of the senators feel that way as well. I was a little bit surprised about the lack of support for that in the regard that it was not adding additional money or additional taxes to the patrons of the district, because it was already an incurred debt versus building where you're going out to ask for permission for additional incurring of debt. I think had that come out probably 45 days earlier, to where the senators had a little bit more time to study it, look at it, there might have been some stronger support for it. I think that several of the senators I talked to that John Lindsay wanted me to visit with were more rural and more, we really don't want to do that without a vote of the patrons in the district.
Right.
But once I explained it to them, they said, okay, well, I understand that a little bit, but I'm still a little bit concerned about it. And the problem was that we're getting close to the end of the session, and they all had they were focused on maybe one or two bills that they had that they need to get through, so they probably didn't have time to drill down into the details on this. And had it come out a little bit sooner, I think it may have received some additional support. But I think it lets everybody know, at least if it comes back again next year, what some of the opposition is going to probably be, and what their thought process is going to be. But it just probably didn't have enough time to get out there soon enough with the dollar amount attached to it.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I know they didn't. Some of them did not understand that it was within the $5 cap. It wasn't asking for any additional taxation. We were going to pay for the bond, the pension obligation bond, which is really, we already owe the money. It wasn't new debt, and some were confused by that. They thought it was new debt. It wasn't new debt. It's the same debt. Basically, you're refinancing. And so that confused some people as well. And certainly the vote of the people, that makes no sense when you're within the budget authority you already have. So it didn't make any sense to have a vote of the people. But
you know, I did visit with Senator Coleman after the session was over, and he would like to get together with Cheryl when she comes in and sit down, also with Cecilia and whatever members of the respective boards that you think are needed. He would like to probably, I know if you go back to that study that was requested a year or so ago, where there was $4 million a year additional increase with a 3% increment. And I think the report came back from Kevin McDonald that it really needs to be in that ballpark of $20 million a year, which I think Senator Coleman indicated to me that he would like to sit down and he would try and steer his committee that if it's acceptable to the board and to the OSERS trustees, that you get not necessarily through a bond, but just through mutual agreement between the committee, OPS, and the trustees of OSERS, that let's look at the $20 million a year for the next couple of years and see what that does. And maybe you use that to budget to, but it's somewhat of a trade-off on what your bond payments would be, but you're not locked into a 25-year bond with that. And so I think that there's some pretty good opportunity to visit with Senator Coleman probably in the third, fourth quarter of the year about getting his committee to say, okay, if everybody agrees with that. I know we have the schedule that comes out with, from the actuarial studies, and if that balloons over the $20 million, maybe everybody agrees to just stick to the $20 million for a couple of years and see what it does. So that's probably an opportunity.
Yeah. This is the last year under $20 million. It's going to be. We just had a report from the actuary, and we're going to 18.9 this year. So it looks like next year is going to be somewhere in the ballpark of $22 million. The district has to put in on top of the 101% contribution. It looks like right now about $22 million, and then the following year, 2 years out, it's $25 million, based on current, unless something dramatically shifts, which I can't imagine in the short term it's going to dramatically shift. So, I mean, the $20 million would be great, but again, it goes back to, I know John mentioned earlier that that's not quite what the actuarial piece is. That's a couple million shy. So, it would be great, but
Well, I think what Senator Coleman is saying is he'd like to discuss that, because I think that if the parties all agree that that's a good number, maybe you look at that for a year or two. But I don't want to speak for Senator Coleman.
Right.
He indicated to me he would like to have that discussion so it somewhat gets capped, because he's well aware of what that schedule does, especially when you get out into 2043 and 2044. Under the old one, I haven't seen the new one yet, but yeah, I think it's worth a meeting in his office to sit and see what he's thinking. If it can cap it a little bit so it doesn't get out of hand.
Jack, is he wanted to have that conversation as part of the interim study, or is that an informal conversation he was hoping to have?
No, I think it's just informal conversation in his office. Probably with including Cheryl when she gets on board, and maybe has some time to get her feet on the ground. I think he would want it more of an informal as opposed to a hearing on the interim resolution. A lot of times, as you know, the interim resolution or those resolutions for a study involve not necessarily totally public input. Sometimes it's invited testimony only, so they don't take all day on some of those if they get too controversial. I think what Senator Copeland is saying, let's just sit down and visit. And he's done that in the last couple of years with the OSERS representatives and the OPS representatives and legal counsel. So I think it would be good to maybe follow up with that later this year.
Okay, are there any other questions for Jack on legislative issues?
All right.
Was that a comment there from the background or no?
Are they always zipping at your heels, Jack?
That's our HR director here at Steve.
Gotcha.
All right. Thank you, Jack. We appreciate it.
I get no respect. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay, why don't we break for a lunch break here, then come back and just finish up a couple things here, and hopefully it shouldn't take too long after lunch. Would that be okay? Everybody?
What do we have?
Okay, I will call the meeting back to order. The next item on the agenda is discussion action on district funding of OSERS.
Well, I think we've had that discussion.
Is that what we were already talked about? Okay.
We just keep it there as a placeholder in case.
All right. And the next item is the financial statements and budgets.
Okay, in your package, you received the changes in fiduciary net position for the period ending March 31, 2018. And as you can see, we had, for the month of March, we had additions totaling $7.6 million, and that is a combination of employee and employer contributions, along with gains on investments. However, we did issue $10.4 million in total deductions for the month of March, which covered retirement annuities and refunds to former employees, which netted us a loss for the month of $2.8 million. So that was our cash flow, basically, for the month of March. The next report, again, this is the balance sheet showing that we have assets at the end of March of $1.248 billion. So that's what's held in trust. And then finally, which we'll just talk about this one a little bit more in depth. The next report is, as of March 31, our cash balance was $13.484 million. Okay, So clearly, we know that we have roughly $10 million in change in expenses each month. OPS accounting requested more money that was needed. So now, next month, meaning for May, tomorrow, I will request only $8 million. So we have trued it back up again. But it takes, we're trying, I have to go over there every month and question where they're pulling the numbers from. And that's what I'll just have to do from now on, because it fluctuates too much.
So this excess cash then just sits in our account till the next month?
It comes
There's
in.
13 million
it
here.
comes in around. It comes in around the middle of the month, to somewhere between the 15th to the 20th of the month. The contributions come back to us from the state.
Right, so at the end of March, there was 13.5 million that came into our account. And then sometime in April, you spent $10 million.
April 3rd to me.
So April, you spent $10 million, so that left $3 million. Is that just $3 million just sitting in the
Yes.
account then until,
For a month.
and for a whole month then
Right.
until next?
Yes. Now we will get interest off of that, but it's not much interest. But we get something off of it.
It's like that 1% interest.
It's probably not even that much.
Do we know why they're pulling more than they need to?
It goes back to that our account, it's one big trust
Right.
account. The person responsible for it,
One big trust account with Omaha Public Schools.
schools,
and
correct.
others.
Correct. And then it's a spreadsheet keeping it
Yeah.
separate.
But don't you tell them how much to draw down? Do you give them, we need to draw down?
That, yes. I tell them, I know what my expenses are going to be, right? I know that my next payroll is going to be, but this is always in arrears. Keep that in mind too. So when I'm drawing down money, on April 3rd or April 4th, when I gave the NIC note or the NPERS notice that I'm going to draw down money, that money is not going to be received until April 15th-ish, April 20th, and that's for my expenses in May. So I'm judging how much is going to be needed. So it's always an estimate, and it's not until the end of April that I actually knew what the exact number is.
You're judging because some people might come in and want money.
Right, between the refunds, retirements, somebody could come in last minute
They can come in.
and say, I want to retire.
They can come in on like the 6th, and you need your payroll at the 15th or the 20th.
Yeah, like if somebody came in, well, no, that's a bad example because you're not paid till the next month, so I do know about them.
Yeah, they can't get it that fast,
they
right?
can't get it that fast. But there's a lot of judging in there, estimating in there as well. Now, should there have been a $3 million difference? No.
Do you need $1 million difference?
I'm comfortable with a $1 million difference.
That's a lot, too.
That is a lot, but again, refunds and expense comes in. You said-
So then at the end of February, just not to belabor this, but you had $11 million in there at the end of February. If you knew that you were going to pay out 10, that would leave
That
you with
left
$1
the
million,
one, exactly.
$1 million in there, but then somehow you got way more.
Right, because
Came in, and that's the question.
they're showing us, no, we're short. So that's why I said every month I just have to go in there and sit down. And like I haven't done this month yet. I have not asked for the money yet, but I will go into accounting, and you're going to have to show me. So now they're telling me 8. I don't want to get caught short, right? We shouldn't be, but You have to show me.
Okay. Questions on that, anybody?
Okay. Budget. Do you want to talk first, or do you want me to talk?
Does everybody have?
Mine, but not that one.
Okay, you've got the official budget in front of you. I'm going to pass around.
We've got two of them there.
Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? I didn't go over the budget variance for March. Sorry. Yes. For the month of March, our expenses were $917. That's all that got posted. So they'll show up next, I guess they'll show up next month. In addition to salary cost. Okay. However, I did do something different on this one. You know, I know we don't have control over the retirement annuities that are going out, but I think it's important to note that overall, we are 6.5% higher than 6.25% higher than we were last year at this time. Just
Spending money.
on spending on retirement annuities. Okay, so if you compare where we were last year to this year, we're 6.25% higher. Just something to just keep a number to just keep on this in another perspective of looking at the big picture of what the cost of the plan is, and this is why we're 6.25% higher in annuity payments than we were this time last year. No fault to my retirees who are retiring, and no fault to my retirees who are living to 104 years old.
Is that that number we're seeing at the bottom
Yeah,
right here?
that's 6.25. Okay.
Okay, so let's talk, Jim. So, what I'm passing around is just kind of a budget summary that I sort of put together from Cecilia's numbers that she had. Jim and I and Cecilia kind of meant to go over the budget, kind of come up with a budget that you're seeing here today. And just in terms of some highlights on the first page there, the proposed operating budget, and that's really the discretionary budget over which we have control, is $1,085,487. That's the budget today.
Yeah.
Our total operating expenses, then that's what comes out of that, is I've compared it in three different ways. We've got, on the top there you see the forecast, and what the forecast is simply where we think 17 and 18 is going to end up in actual numbers. That's not the actual, but that's what we're currently forecasting it through the end of this year. So this new budget shows a 5.6% reduction over that forecasted number, okay? The next item is the budget. This is the actual budget we put together a year ago, the 17-18 budget. This new budget then shows a reduction of 21.4% over that budget. And finally, I went back and I compared it to the last actual year's results that we had, and that was the 16-17 year. This new budget shows a 10.3% reduction over where we were in 16 and 17. How did we accomplish this? Well, we streamlined some of the expenses, and with respect to the office staff, we've got two people that are gone now. We are only going to replace one of those people, so there'll be a reduction of one FTE. So the total staff is going from 5 back to 4. Okay? So those are just kind of the highlights that you'll see in this budget. So if you turn to page 2, kind of look at the top, the actual number there in that first kind of box at the top shows you the last 3 actual years, 14-15, 15-16, and then 16-17, which I just talked about. Those are the actual numbers in the budget. And then it shows you the next spot is the 17-18 budget, and that's the budget we put together last year. And then finally the forecast. This is as close as we can come to where we think this year is going to actually end up. And then the highlighted item, kind of in the middle of the page, that's the proposed budget. And if you look to the bottom, you'll see the $1,085,487 is that budget number, okay? And then if you want to do some comparison, I compared the budget to each of those three items that we talked about on the first highlighted page, and you can just kind of follow down. But as you see, with respect to salary and benefits, we're actually 0.1% over where we were in 16-17, the proposed budget. But we're 20.6% under where we were budgeting to be, and we'll be 12.5% under where we are forecasting to end up the year. So we're saving 12.5% on salaries and benefits. And then you can just kind of follow down with the other categories of, purchase services, supplies, and other expenses. You'll notice the liability expenses of 37.6. We just have that number there budgeted because at the time this was done, we didn't know what was going to happen to that. So I'm assuming that there'll be further savings with respect to that, but to quantify that, we don't know. So I think at this point, we'll just keep that at the 37.6. Those are kind of the highlighted notes. The next couple of pages just kind of graphically show you. Go ahead.
How we pulled out the on this, we pulled out the expenses, investment costs.
Yeah, I put all those below the line, those non-discretionary items that we cannot control, and that's the portfolio management fees. You'll see in 14-15, 15-16, we had those fees, but since that time we haven't been able to get those fees, so there's nothing in there. That's why the comparison looks kind of funny, but we simply can't get the number. We kind of threw a $2 million figure in there for the forecast, thinking that may be close to where we are, but we certainly don't know that number at this point. Same is true for bank service charges. Those are charges coming from State Street.
Yes, State Street Bank of Trust.
State Street. And again, they haven't been able to break those numbers out for us, so we can't really budget what they are. We can't do anything about them, and it doesn't affect the discretionary budget that we're kind of talking about here. Does that make sense to everybody? At some point, hopefully, we'll be able to determine what those are.
Well, we're working with accounting
to try to get those numbers, so then we'll have a clearer picture. And again, the last couple of pages are just kind of a graphical display of our expenses. You can see that salaries and benefits obviously make up the lion's share of our expenses, which is kind of what you would anticipate. The very last graph chart kind of shows you those expenses, and they'll show you that since 17, the last couple of years they've come down, and we're projecting them to come down even further this year. So that budget will be at the $1,085,000 figures. Okay?
Recommendation. I know on the Budget Reduction Committee, we're cutting all travel by half. We've got $40,000 listed for out-of-state conferences. Would the group be interested in cutting that by half and making it $20,000 and not traveling as much? Is that something the group would entertain?
Why don't at this juncture, let's make a motion to approve the budget, and then we'll go back and if people have those kind of recommendations, we can do that. Would that be fair?
Okay.
Okay. Could I have a motion to approve the budget?
I'll move to approve the budget as presented.
Okay, moved and seconded. Can I have a second?
Second. Done.
All right, now,
Yeah.
if you have changes or things you'd like to suggest, you'd like to move, please go ahead and do that.
I'll repeat the same comment. We spent $46,000 last year, $35,000, 16, $46,000, 15. We budgeted $40,000 by this budget for this next year. I'd make a motion to reduce it by half, like the rest of the district is, in order to meet budget reductions, and make it $20,000. And then whoever goes on those conferences comes back and shares what they learned, as opposed to spending all that money when we're not doing that with other district entities. But it's up to the body. That's my recommendation.
Okay. It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, discussion.
Wait, we didn't vote
Well-
on the first one.
Oh, we didn't, did we?
Yeah, I thought that was just discussion.
You don't
Yeah.
need to do a motion on top of a motion,
Yeah, we
right?
got-
Yeah, motion on top of the motion.
Okay,
right?
let's move this.
vote on the first one, and then his. I was just thinking this was discussion, but you can't turn it into a motion yet. So let's vote on it, and then his recommendation
To change it. To change it.
Okay.
Okay, so
So now-
let's just back up.
Okay.
Not forgetting what's been said.
Gotcha.
Back up.
Gotcha.
Now, this is the vote on the
Gotcha.
actual budget. And then
As
we'll look-
presented.
As presented.
Okay, with motioned by Mr. Ray and seconded by Mr. Jones. So
Sorry about that.
Repa,
Aye.
Ray,
Aye.
Jones,
Right?
Havlicek.
So wait a minute, we're
Just voting
We've got to
on.
come back to
We'll
it.
have to come
Okay.
back.
Come back to it.
aye or yes, yeah.
Okay. Evans
Aye.
and Erickson.
Aye.
6 ayes. Okay.
Now, the motion is on the floor.
To reduce
that.
$40,000 in out-of-state travel to $20,000 to reflect the similar budget reductions the district's doing with travel expenses.
Okay, so that's been moved and seconded.
Yeah,
Now,
exactly.
Who's the
discussion
second?
of-
Who's the second? Okay.
So,
Just parallel with the district, the rest of the district is.
Okay.
okay, so discussion on that.
What's the actual dollar amount for district budget for travel? You know,
355,000.
5,000. You're taking that down to.
I think actually we're taking 200,000 off of what the budget line, so it's actually more than half. But I thought showing half would be a good faith. It's an optics piece more than anything else, where folks kind of like the same with the district reductions. It's pretty small in comparison to the dollar amount, the millions that we're reducing, but it's an optics piece. People really look at that, and so I think that's where I would say the value is that you're trying to find ways to reduce, even though I recognize it's a small amount. Same with the district piece, it's pretty small compared to the millions that we're having to reduce.
I think it's important to maintain at least the appearance of trying to put money into the trustee education and keep the skills of the trustees up to snuff. I don't think you can share enough information in a short meeting or a summary of your report as you get in the meeting itself. And I would recommend if we want to have an ethics piece, that we just cut that from $40,000 to $30,000. It doesn't cut it by half, but it does cut it a substantial amount. And it still maintains enough that trustees can maintain their skill levels. Someone commenting on that possibility.
I mean, as we looked at this budget, we tried to do more than just optics. I mean, when I looked at it, we really tried to look at what are ways we could really cut what this office was doing and how we could reduce expenses without having to do that. And certainly we've cut FTE, we've cut other expenses, we've done a lot of things, and as you see, I mean, we've cut the budget pretty substantially in a number of areas. So,
Appreciate that.
I think that's our gesture to doing what we're doing. So, I wouldn't be in favor of cutting it all. I think it's important that we have the trustee education in place, and I think the numbers that you see aren't necessarily what was spent in that year because there's overlapping and the different things that go on. So it's a little hard, isn't that true,
Correct.
Cecilia?
That
That's the
particular
case. So-
year, I know it was from the previous school year, wasn't paid until the next school year. So there was a bit of overlap.
And
So-
I'm just reflecting what I think is going to come out when our reporter comes out with an article. I think there's going to be comments about travel in his article. I know he's looking at all those details, and I'd like for us to be able to say we recognize that, and we're trying to minimize it as much as possible while continuing the education, because I'm very confident that he's going to have notation on the amount of travel of our trustees versus the Emperor's board versus other boards, and I know we may not like that, but we can't control what he writes. And I already know that that's one of the things he's looking at. And so I think it would be a proactive move that would help to say, hey, we're trying to minimize as much as we can. We recognize that we might have public scrutiny. So it's up to the body, but that's my logic on it, is it gives you an opportunity to say that we recognize the challenges. And we've cut back as much as we can, but we still felt like we definitely had to have at least this amount to get the minimum amount of education, maybe rotate that around amongst the members, and everybody doesn't get to go every single year, but you certainly have good representation that comes back and shares, which is what a lot of the other trustee boards and pensions across the country do. And I know that's part of what I think we're going to hear in the articles he's going to write. And so it's up to you guys, but that's my logic on why I think it would be helpful for you down the road, personally.
I understand that logic. I've looked at how much other track retirement systems devote to trustee education, and it's not per trustee, but it's a total travel budget, travel education budget, and typically it's between $10,000 to $15,000 per trustee. This is not even close to that, at $40,000. As it stands, I would probably vote against the motion. Because I think our reductions in staff, our reductions in where we're looking at where we reduce substantial amounts of money. We've done that. This is an optics piece, and I'm not sure it's an optics piece that makes a lot of sense.
There are other comments?
I would just, I guess, mirror I understand it's important for the trustee education piece. I do think eyes go there first, and that's it's a perception thing. I've been questioned on it. For Connie C, at the first, one of the first comments when we presented the budget was, "What's trustee education?" I think we can come up with a policy or at least some guidelines for travel. That my department has done that. I think other departments here have done that. When I've decided who's traveling. For areas that I'm representing, I usually go with board members first that are serving on national boards, such as Roger, and they get kind of those priority spots. And then, we do have a rotating system as to who needs the development, who needs the training, who needs the newer members are going first. Those that require teacher training, they're attending those opportunities first as well, and then they come back and I ask them to share at a curriculum day in service or an education system. So it works, I think. Not to say that some years we don't have to vary that amount a little bit, and maybe we consider that as trustees change. But I do think something needs to probably come off the top of that. I won't be able to attend all the opportunities this year myself, just for personal scheduling reasons. Looking at my calendar anyway, so I think that may cover some of that difference on this. But we have a new superintendent coming in, and that individual may need some training as well. So I think we need to kind of share the wealth on that. It's not a popular decision, but I think it's the reality that it's that perception piece.
It's a nice message.
And I know we've talked some about a policy or guidelines, and I think at some point we should go back and look at that. And, what is the given that we should have as trustees? Are there other opportunities? And maybe when we look at other opportunities, there aren't any. Maybe we do need that to stay highly educated. But I'd really like to have something in writing as we justify this.
I think one of the things, I follow up on that, if we keep the trustee education budget at $40,000, we can pass our own internal rules about how to use that, and it's very likely that utilization is not to match that expense. I remember when I was talking with another board that I worked on about the board education expense, I said put a substantial amount into that budget, even if we don't use it, to indicate that we are committed to maintaining the skills of our board. We may not use it all, and we never did. They don't use it all, but it sends a message. It sends a message that maintaining the skills is an important part of being a trustee. You can't be a good fiduciary without maintaining the skills.
I think I like the last observation, that is managing the expense. And we've had a very general policy, and I think it is worthwhile to examine it. I also am firmly on the side of supporting education on the part of all the trustees. Because regardless of how many are there, we tend to reinforce the knowledge just amongst ourselves. So it's a plus minus. I mean, I see where we're at. I really have nothing significantly new to contribute, but I truly like the idea of managing it through a policy and giving priorities where that seems appropriate, as they will change from time to time as we have, national representation. I think that needs to be supported.
And we will have a travel policy to review at the retreat in June. It's being put together now, so we will have something to take a look at and as an area of discussion, and sort of there needs some tweaks to it, and it's not definitive by any means, but it's kind of a blueprint as to where I think it puts things in perspective. We've always kind of had a policy, but it's been kind of, I don't know whether it's a written down policy or not, but we'll formalize that at this summer's retreat. That's going to be one of the agenda items, so just so you know. Okay, any further discussion?
So related to that or related to another line item? Any?
That's the motion, yeah, to this
So,
motion.
okay, we're still on that motion. I'm sorry. My parliamentary procedure is off today.
Well, mine too, so. No, that's the motion at hand, so. Okay, sensing none, you want to just reread the motion so it's clear? Should be pretty simple.
With regard to line item
Trustee education.
trustee education, to reduce the budgeted amount in half to $20,000. Motion by Evans, seconded by Havlicek.
So a vote for would reduce it to $20,000.
Correct.
Yeah, to accept the motion.
Correct, okay.
Okay.
You may call the roll.
Evans,
Aye.
Havlicek,
Aye.
Jones,
Name?
Ray,
No.
Reba,
No.
Erickson.
No.
2 yeas and
4 nays.
4 nays. The motion fails.
Okay, motion fails. Okay. Delane, did you have another item?
I would just question, I know you have 0 under mileage reimbursement. Should there be something?
The only person that would use it, I mean, I've never submitted it. I don't use it. It would be like a Jim or Tim.
No one had used it in the last several
yeah.
years. We had a $500 figure there, and no one ever used it, so we just kind of took it
And
out.
with the traveling that I do, I don't submit it.
Okay. So, I mean, you have trips to Lincoln periodically.
Right, I don't submit
so-
those. And I don't get reimbursed like the Nebraska Investment Council people get reimbursed.
Legal services is another question I have. Are we on par with that? Are we
Leave the same.
think that will stay the same?
I don't think it'll be used as much, but leave the same because we don't know what's going on with some of our litigation
Okay.
until that finalizes.
And then finally, contracted professional services. Is that lobbyists?
That is government services, that's elections if we have to have it, and what do you call it? What is that company's name? Benefit, the one that tracks down our deceased members.
You should keep that.
Yes.
I would just question: do we need the lobbying services to the point that we currently have them? Is that a $40,000 annual?
48, yes.
48.
They're not increasing the fee, and I think the service was invaluable, especially this
Okay.
year.
I don't know what all. I guess if there's more or less that is there a XLE package that we're buying, or are we just getting
No,
the LE
no.
package or
No.
Toyota language? But are we? Do we have more than what we need for the lobbying?
We get more than what we pay for.
Yeah.
Yes.
He does a lot.
I'm not denying that. I just.
Hopefully we'll get to the point where we don't need him anymore. Hope we can get to that point at some time. But for now, I think we do need to.
Now, when you look at the interim studies that are coming up, I think we'll need someone to be on top of that.
There's so many people coming after pension plans and things like that.
And he is not as expensive as some lobbyists down there.
Yeah, I don't deny that
Yeah.
it's a great service. I've never hired a lobbyist, so I don't even know what. Nor
He's
do I
a
plan on it.
governmental relations vendor.
I've never hired a governmental relations vendor in my personal life, so nor do I plan to. You never know.
Okay, are there any more questions on either the financials or the budget? All right, if not, we'll move on to the trustee education election.
Okay. As an update for the board, the ballots were mailed. They went out last Friday. Next steps. They went out last Friday, and members, certificated members, began receiving their election ballots Monday and Tuesday of this week. Just to give you a count, so the company did verify to me that a total of 4,572 ballots were mailed out, and you will be happy to know that we had no foreign addresses, and that is a good thing because we do have some teachers who are from overseas, right? And now when we do the retiree election, we could have foreign addresses. Okay. Let's see. On May 4th at 8 a.m., online voting will open, and it will close at 5 p.m. on the following week, May 18th. However, if someone still has not voted online, so long as their paper ballot is postmarked by May 18th and received by the election service company by May 25, it will be counted.
Did everyone here see the copy of
I'm going to do that.
So they haven't seen it.
Some have, some haven't. Yeah. Well, by now everybody's seen it on Facebook.
They might have.
Something on Facebook.
Well, that's why I wanted everybody to see it, because
Yeah.
that causes a lot of questions, which actually goes back to, there's comments related to conference spending and that kind of stuff. So I wanted everybody to know this is what folks are looking at. Is when that went out, I started getting calls.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Had you seen that?
No, Don hasn't seen it at all.
Okay. You might want to take a moment to read this one to every certified employee, so you might want to see what they got. Certainly caused my phone. I don't know if you did or not. Your phone did.
College, but
My phone did.
what caused the phone ring?
No.
These are both
I
the
have no
same.
comment.
These are both the same.
No, what I'm showing you, yes, it is the same, but what I did want to mention is the way the ballot is printed, half of the recipients received the version of last name A through Z in that order, and half of them received a version of last name Z through A, reverse order.
Oh.
And that's the way it also will show up.
So one got put on this way and one got put on.
Correct. So that there's no preference.
How come that happened?
So that there's no preference. There's
That's
no
why it
order
happened?
preference.
Yeah,
Right.
deliberate.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
deliberate.
Okay.
And when people log on, one person might see it A through Z, the name's listed, and the next person will see it Z through A. Yes. There's
On
no
purpose.
preference.
On purpose.
Correct. That is especially important when you have more than two. It just rotates.
Okay, makes sense.
Were they reading it?
Okay. It also gives instructions on what to do if you've lost your ballot. We've already received that call. So hopefully that person did not call back, and so they got the proper customer service, and a new ballot is being printed and on their way to the person. It was kind of like the dog ate my ballot. Okay, the other thing I also want to, I was going to bring up the election policy thing about the retirees. Okay, so the other thing I also wanted to bring to your attention is something we need to think about that came out in this election. So we know that we have retirees who have come back to work, and they have come back to work full time in a certificated position. Okay. On the 2018 election, we identified 19 annuitants who have returned to work. So they are voting in this election. Had there been an election last year, they would have voted last year. They're going to vote this year. Next year will be classified, but then the following year will be retirement or annuitant election. And the policy says your status as of March 31 determines how you are eligible to vote. But given this could be considered a gray area, I do think we need to think about just clarifying the policy a little bit and possibly adding a sentence to page 5, which we can come back next month and talk about formally, but to think about under section 4.4 voter eligibility of our election policy, and to add a sentence that says something along the lines, in any given year, an annuitant who has returned to work at a class 5 school district and is making employee contributions into OSERS is not eligible to vote in elections conducted for the retiree seat, so that they are only voting in their status on March 31, because technically on March 31 they are certified and they're also a retirant. So that's something for us to think about, and I'll have something more formal for you at the next meeting. But if you have any comments, please get them to me.
Would it be shareable if once they're retired, they have to vote retired, that's all?
They are then voting, that they only vote retired. That's a thought, too.
I'm reminded of a policy that one of the organizations I belong to has about voting. If you're eligible to vote in several categories, you're only eligible actually to vote in one that has the highest governance rights. And although it's not governance rights here, if you're eligible to vote either an annuitant or an active member, the active member has the meeting of representatives on the board here. They would have permission to have that eligible to vote, not for the annuitant.
So kind of just opposite.
I say they have 2 chances to vote in this category and 1 chance in this category, rather than voting all 3.
I just think it's something we need to clarify. So however we want to do it, we just have to make it consistent. So.
All right, well then for the next meeting I'll have both ways, language for both ways, and then you guys can decide, so you'll see it. Yeah.
Or if your way was a little different too.
No, mine was the kind of Roger's way, but just formalizing it that your status as of March 31, if you are contributing to OSERS, then you can't vote as an annuitant.
Are there
Okay.
any systems that would let them vote twice? I mean, let them vote for all 3 seats? Would that be policy?
That would be 3. There, out of the 4 elections we have on a cycle, that person would vote for 3. Yeah.
But if I own 75% of GE, I'll get more votes there also.
You're getting 1 vote. Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
Is it easy to filter those duplicates out? I assume it would just be remove duplicates.
Yeah, their number. If we said remove them from the active roll, their numbers would kick out, and I'd be able to remove them. Yeah.
So some are getting in, some aren't by, human error.
Yeah, it wouldn't be that. This is a distinct enough number. Yes.
Why don't they just come back next time with
both
both
sides?
And we'll take a look at it. Okay. Let's move on to the executive director's report.
Okay. Let me start with update on PeopleSoft, and I've asked Mr. Lennon to come to the meeting and just kind of bring the board up to date on where we are with the PeopleSoft project. It's all Mr. Lennon's show now.
I think my counterpart Jim voiced some of his concerns in the completion of this project, and I'm going to go ahead and do that too. We're very, 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 very far behind at where we should be in a project like this, to the point where I really have a lack of confidence whether or not we're going to have a functional product when it rolls out. Right now, at this point, we don't even have a functional product to test. Some big things happened during the project. We lost our subject matter experts for some reason, and the great deal of work that needed to be done was not put in the initial contract to be done, and it took a very long time to convince the powers that be to put that in the contract. So realistically, our project has really only been running for maybe a month and a half, and historically a project that took 18 months. That is right now our big issue. Our other issue is, I'm going to go to the whiteboard and try to put some visualization to it, is we have the main PeopleSoft core right here, which is payroll, benefits, and everything in the world. Our world is over here in the PeopleSoft module. What we do is, every time a payroll is created and everything is done, we run what's called a consolidation that runs basically a set of payroll information over here. And we rely on everything, the initial core PeopleSoft, payroll, benefits, tables to be all updated and running in order to pull accurate information across. Right now we can't do that. We have these COBOL programs in here that are the main thing we do, and there's about 36 of them that run sequentially down and do all this wonderful processing between them. And what they do, it's very old-fashioned computer programming, but that's how PeopleSoft runs. It runs sequentially from the top down. It's not one program after another. It's one big thing. So our issue is over here is because the final PeopleSoft product is not finalized yet with time and labor, contract, all that good stuff on this side. Even if we do get our COBOL completely fixed to work, if they should in the next few weeks make a change over here, we need to go through and reflect that change so it goes across. So there's a very big issue right now that they could still make a change that, although everything we fixed and is working, could then get thrown back on its ear and we start back at phase one to go through and test everything. And so that's sort of where we're at right now. I'm not calling doomsday yet, but from a practical standpoint of view, I'd say Mr. Pareto is winning at 80-20 on the 80% that we won't have a functioning product. That's just my 2 cents. You can ask anyone else in the project management team their opinion. I'm sure they'll give you a different opinion, but I've done this for a long time, and I'm just not seeing a whole lot of light of day at the end of the tunnel right now.
One of the things that was expressed as a concern last month was the lack of a pension specialist on the COBOL program.
2 guys that were probably the best in the business. We had Sam Nichols and Evan Leventhal. If you go out and talk to anyone to recommend 2 guys, they were, after the initial fit gap that Oracle did, it was handed off to Accenture, and we did probably a 6-week process to meet with them, define our goals, define 24 main retrofits that needed to be done. And then shortly after that, they were dismissed from the project, and everything that we've done with them seemed to have been forgotten and omitted from the project.
And they were employees of
Accenture.
Accenture?
Yes.
Without that kind of expertise, is there any likelihood that even if the PeopleSoft conversion is able to be rolled out on time, that the pension portion of it is going to be accurate and reflective of?
It's very difficult. I spend a lot of my time basically writing up. An example is right now we're having trouble in consolidations moving what as an employee puts in each month, just simply move that information over to the pension module. That's not working. So what I have to do is I basically have to write up the entire process and logic of that and send that out to a COBOL developer through Accenture, and then they work on it. With our staffing right now, that's a whole lot of time and effort taken away from our busiest time of year right now. Just basically it's me and Jim trying to retire the 110 people in the school district, and another, I'm guessing, 100 or more people that will just be leaving at the end of the year. So our time is taxed to do this. And that doesn't even include testing. So when they fix everything, we have to go back and retrofit. Probably, in my last check, 300 unique processes that could be affected that each have to be going manually tested. And so right now we're doing hit or miss. We're trying to look at the big things that could go wrong and the big things we use on a day-to-day basis and cover them. But we're not even through those yet. Right now, like I said, we do not have a functioning product. We cannot consolidate data from the main PeopleSoft into our system to do calculations.
This is for new people that you need to put in there, or
Yes, this is being able to pull everyone's paycheck data across.
not the people that are already getting a check, but the people that are retiring now?
Yes, but it will also affect stuff like cost of living increases, stuff like that. And then there's also things like the payroll bridge and stuff that could be affected that we use when we send payroll over. You're correct. There is, the worst case scenario, it doesn't work. We might be able to generate a payroll for past retirees that are already in the system. That is more of a Jim question on his side of expertise that he does that. That's a maybe. The trouble is then quantifying accuracy with that. Have they come back as an employee? What other status has changed on them and stuff? I hate to think we're going to run a payroll without being able to actually quantify it.
Do you have an answer?
No, there is no. Right now, there is no answer. The answer is we hope and pray that everything, all the cards and dice turn up the right way. And I'm wrong and it works. That's what we hope for.
So that also will be a discussion at the retreat. Plan B for going forward. And this reliance on this PeopleSoft and the COBOL.
Seems like it's been an issue for several years now.
When is this supposed to roll out and go live?
July 25th, I believe.
Of this year.
Yeah.
Is there a chance that can be pushed back a year?
That is out of that would be putting the whole project back. And this is not just our module. This is the entire PeopleSoft that does everything from payroll to accounting and finance to whatever other modules they have hooked in it for the school district. This is basically the core function. The whole school district is tied into this one program. We are a satellite module of that.
So they're not going to hold up the whole project just for our piece, what you're saying?
I very much doubt it. And that would be a question for hiring project managers than I am.
How many people do you think would it take to do all this if you had to do it the hard way?
The big thing we would need to do if it would get turned back to us to fix, if it would become the point that we have to implement a fix to it, we need to bring in subject matter experts that are expert at PeopleSoft and the pension module. There are a very rare, small amount of people that know it. We have very talented COBOL programmers working on it right now. They know their stuff in COBOL, but you could take the most talented pilot in the world and put it on a plane. They don't know how to fly, and they're not going to fly it. That's sort of the analogy that I use. They have a chance of figuring it out, but the thing is, I just got an email yesterday that just basically figuring out how the computation works and what the computation, the logic behind it is supposed to be to figure out in order for him to program it to make it work. Those are the trouble that we have, and I wish we'd have been able to keep Sam Nichols and Evan. Those were really bright guys that were probably some of the best at it in the PeopleSoft module directly.
Mark, last month you indicated that you would contact the vendor to see if they could get some of this expertise back. Do you have any success at that?
I think it's a personnel matter. They're not our employees, so I couldn't make them give me all the issues, but there's some personnel issues. And it's not my employees, so I can't find them out. So I don't know what the challenge is. I think the project's not just here struggling. I think it's hard. The way I understand it, and I'm no expert on PeopleSoft and COBOL, we did an update for years, and so we got way behind, and so now we're trying to play catch up, and it's a lot of pain points. It's a lot of pain points with this module. There's pain points with other parts of the modules as well. We just didn't invest. To me, to give you an analogous to where we are, it's kind of like the bond issue. We didn't have bond issue for 15 years, and so we're playing catch up because we had all these unmet needs because no one did a damn thing about it. I'm sorry, and I feel PeopleSoft. We let it sit and sit, and every year, if you don't update this, and every organization has to do it, and we didn't do it. We didn't do it in the bond issue, we didn't do it with PeopleSoft, so we kind of have this pent-up need because we didn't take care of business. That's how it looks to me. So it's not just this area. I would suggest there's other areas.
Mr. Evans is 100% correct. I won't speak for any other modules, but I know there's some significant
Others, yes.
struggling in other areas too.
So I know they're all looking at what they're going to have to invest to bring in more supports for everything because it's a bit of a debacle. That's kind of how they share it with me. And again, I'm no expert on how COBOL works and how to integrate an old system. I know COBOL's dying and we're trying to get it out of that dead environment, but we should have done it 10 years ago. That's when most systems were doing it. Systems I've been a part of, we got rid of it 10 years ago. We were off all that 10 years ago. We didn't do it. And so we're paying a big price for not taking care of business. And so he's describing, I think, pretty accurate.
Did you talk about the change order that they had asked for?
We did that last month, yes.
You did it?
Yeah.
So it's huge.
I will compliment our vendor. Our vendor is doing everything that they realistically can. I have to say Accenture is jumping through hoops. It is probably a larger project and a higher difficult scope of project than we probably originally
that they even
envisioned.
realized, yeah.
That they,
Yeah, so I can't remember how many millions are we investing?
7 million.
7 million we're investing to play catch up on this thing. And we still are going to need more because of what he's describing here. And I will tell you that it's not the only module struggling. So it's huge. But the challenge is, do you kick the can down the road more, or do you try to fix this something good? I think you got to try to fix
I think
this
one of the questions I do have, and I don't want to put you on the spot or anything, do you think there's a possibility that they could just delay turning the on switch on?
That's
I don't know
not
the answer to
in
that. I don't know the
purview
answer to
right
that.
now.
Okay.
So what do you see as a possible solution?
Adding staff, adding supports to Accenture, paying more money to try to get more supports to help with some of the writing that he's talking about. It's not just this module.
Right.
It's multiple modules. Like again, I'm using the bond issues and analogies. We let things go for 15 years, and it's hard to catch up. And you should be on a regular rotation of software update. Most organizations do that.
But when budgets are tight, those are things that get put off, same
That's
as
what
textbooks or anything else.
That's what happened.
So it's really not Accenture's fault. Are they at fault here in any way, or?
No, I'm not. I would not fault anyone. The only question I have is why some decisions were made on some things. I just think it's one of those things. I think if you go through it with a fine-tooth comb, you can look at why was this decision made? Why didn't we realize that we needed to do this COBOL retrofit as part of it and just couldn't move it over? Why did we try to do it in a quick time frame? Why didn't we backfill positions? It basically came down to just finances again, and people made decisions thinking, hey, maybe we could get through it for cheaper than we can, and that's the decisions that were made. And 2020 hindsight, especially in computers, is always 20/20. And it's the point where you can look back and point fingers. The question is now, what can we do to fix this as we go forward?
I just feel kind of hamstrung here. I don't know what to do as a board to help you or what we can do. I appreciate knowing where we are and what could potentially happen, but
Well, it's going to
When
be
the change orders come through, you'll have to approve them because they'll have to spend more to get COBOL programmers here.
which is, I mean, you just have to spend it. But it is also that we also have to just make sure it's done correctly and not rushed, because this affects people's calculations. The outcome affects people's calculations.
And that very much is the issue with us, is small calculations off over a long period of time
Add
will make a mess.
Correct.
okay. Thank you, I guess.
Thank you, folks. Have a good day.
Thank you. Cecilia, is there more to your report?
Let's see. I did participate in the NCTR webinar on April 25th, and that was a webinar on gun companies and as investments in portfolios. And only because of just we are in a climate of, this is a very passionate discussion, especially amongst pension plans that support teachers. The gist of the webinar sponsored by National Council on Teachers Retirement did respect the passion and the emotion. However, it did go through with their, the legal people that were on the webinar, reminding everyone that they are a fiduciary. And as a fiduciary, your responsibility and your loyalty is to the plan and the growth of the plan. But there was something that was interesting that was used, a phrase that was used, and it was the everything being equal test. So, if a constituency came forward and, went to the Nebraska Investment Council, we want you to divest from gun companies. Well, can the portfolio be designed that the replacement for those companies that are divested bring to the portfolio the same risk and return? Okay. So, there are opportunities where you can respect that divestment request, but it does need to be everything being equal. And your loyalty is to the trust fund, and that's paramount. So it was a good webinar. Trustee fiduciary liability insurance, we did that earlier. I do want to remind the board, or just file with the board, that I filed the first quarter 2018 Nebraska Form C, and that is with regards to use of our government relations vendor. And so this is a quarterly report I have to file with the state. So just want to, I'm just trying to enlighten the board to some of the little things that go on behind the scenes. It's not something, but it does take a minute to for me to fill it out and make sure I'm doing it correctly, and then hit send and go, let me look at it one more time, print, okay, hit send. And that concludes my trustee report for what's been going on.
Okay, any questions?
Excuse me, executive director report. Thank you.
Any questions of Cecilia with regard to any of that? All right, if not, we'll move on to the trustees report. And I just have a couple of things. Cecilia's appraisal is due, and I know that Delane and Lance have agreed to work on that, so that's kind of in process right now, okay? The other thing I'd point your attention to on the website now, she's putting out a meeting digest. I don't know if we talked about this at the last meeting, but kind of a digest of everything that kind of transpired in this meeting is kind of put out on our website, kind of a summary form. So I did go out and look at that the other day, and it's very nice just to kind of be able to see that. I think
it comes
it's
out a
good.
little bit quicker, and I also share it with our stakeholders.
Yeah, if you don't want to listen to the whole podcast to see what went on, you can certainly listen to this, and that's nice too. So, okay. Anybody else have a trustee report?
I was interviewed last week by the National Education Association's NEA Today magazine about my upcoming role as the president-elect of NCTR. The article here and the next issue, which will probably come out sometime later this year. Just FYI.
Okay.
I was interviewed by Henry Cordes, and I know he's preparing for a big article that sounds to me like he's doing a really in-depth study of the long-term history of OSERS, and my guess is, I know he's talked to Roger as well, I know he's talked to Cecilia as well, my guess is he'll want to talk to everybody in this room, if you're willing to. He's pulling every record you can imagine, and I think he's that kind of guy. When he puts it together, it's going to be a lengthy written piece on OSERS and the history of OSERS and all of those things. So if you haven't been contacted by them, I guess, is you will be. Has anyone else besides Roger and Cecilia been contacted by them?
I think our policy is kind of, if we do get contacted, Cecilia is the point person on that. So I'm not going to give him any quotes. I know that.
It'd be interesting. It didn't sound like he was near the end of his study from what he told me. Because I kind of asked him when we plan on writing this. It sounded like it may be a month and a half as he dives through all the details and all of that.
He is very thorough. He is looking at old reports, old minutes, I shouldn't say old, historical reports, historical minutes, and working his way forward. I had to go into what we call the dungeon to get historical minutes and documents and actually just go from there.
Okay, anybody else want to report? If not, we'll go on to new business. I assume that, go ahead.
I was going to say, is this where we're going to talk about changing the possible date for the
I
June?
was just going to ask that, yeah. You got to get to it eventually, right?
Not the
Okay. So
Well, we're looking to change the date of the...
it is scheduled for
retreat.
June 6th. That's the public scheduling date. Then we talked about moving it to June 20 because there's several conflicts on June 6th. There's now a conflict on June 20. So my question for the board is one more week, the 27th. Is that fine? I see something's written here.
Anytime during that week.
Anytime when?
Anytime the week of the 17th or 20th.
Okay, so, the 19th of June would be fine.
I'm writing curriculum standards on the 19th and 20th.
Okay, that's out, and the rest of the rest of that week is bad. I hate doing it on a Monday.
The 6th does not work out the same.
For more than one person, correct.
And we can move it into July.
Yes,
We've
that's
done that in the past, too, and we could do that.
I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Is there a best interest here?
How could you come into this not knowing it would be your last meeting?
Let's do it July 2nd. No, I'm teasing.
That's 4th of July week.
I know,
You may
that's
not-
why I said I'm
do it
teasing.
then. Do it then.
But certainly July. Wait, I got to think about my weddings. Certainly July 11th.
Sounds really good.
7/11.
I am out on 11th, I know.
Okay. 10th. I mean, like just the 11th. Okay.
No, the 9th through the 11th, so I could do the 12th.
I'm good.
I don't, as far as I don't have anything planned out that far in advance so that I know of.
I don't have July weddings.
You have to check with Bob and see if he's okay on the 12th.
Yeah, it should be. All right.
During the day, right?
Yes, during the day. Okay, so July 12. Okay,
That's a Thursday.
That's a Thursday. Now, what does everybody's calendar look for July 17?
That looks good.
You came across that just too quick. I don't think you checked.
That's a Tuesday.
That's a Tuesday. Everybody still good? Okay, and I'm going to do one more date, Wednesday, July 18th.
Did you scratch the 17th?
No.
No,
I'm
she's
just
just trying to
putting
get
some
some-
backups. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they're open sooner than later. I'll need to go on vacation sometime.
Okay, so what I will do is confirm one of these 3 dates with other people that are involved in our retreat, I will immediately send out a blast, and I will post it in our office and to our website so the public knows that the June meeting has been canceled and moved or rescheduled to a date in July.
So we should hold all 3 of those for now?
Yes.
Okay.
17th, 18th, and what?
The 11th, the 17th, and the
12th.
Oh,
The
I'm
12th.
sorry, the 12th,
12th, 17th,
the
and 18th.
17th, and 18th.
Now, do you need a June meeting to approve?
That's what I was going to ask. Do we need to?
No, because you'll ratify those. No. You'll ratify those and approve the others.
What about the meeting in August?
Oh, got about that. All right, so there's August 1 is our scheduled August meeting. At the July meeting, I'll bring the schedule for the next school year, but we already know that there is a conflict for August 1, which would be our August meeting. So
It might be okay just because we've kind of just met in July to kind of have it a little bit later.
right. So
We just don't want to get in the habit of moving
Keep
meetings
moving
just to
them,
accommodate
right.
a person, even if it's Roger, but,
I
Thank
would
you for not doing that.
you know,
call the name.
with all due respect.
So again, we'll put it off. What did we say? We're having it. Oh, that's going to be question 1.
Can we just
2.
go back to August 1 and get it back on schedule?
That puts it right close together.
It puts it right. Yeah, it really puts it like back to back. 2 weeks later, we're having a meeting. So it would be nice to move it to
Back
A little
on
bit later.
schedule, too.
yeah, at least the 8th.
That's my birthday.
Noted.
If we could luck out and have it on the 12th, then it would be 4 weeks to August 1st.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you just kind of work with those and then
Okay.
send out an email and get back to Cecilia right away with, yes, this schedule works, and if not, then just say it doesn't. Do you want me to check on the location too for all these dates?
Yes,
I mean,
yeah.
one of them may not work for all I
Exactly.
know, and you have to go
I was
somewhere
going to
else.
talk to you on the side about that one, but yeah.
That's fine.
yeah.
August 8th is the first day teachers come back.
Okay.
Just for reference. I don't know when the leadership kickoff would be.
Okay.
I will look at the calendar.
Okay, any further new business? Seeing none, I will adjourn the meeting at 1:44.